Well, welcome guys. Today the footage in the background is going to be the Jade Sea, and why is that? Well, hopefully as you're aware, at the end of the week, Friday, in just a couple of days, they're going to be doing a big stream on the Jade Sea in End of Dragons, Guild Wars 2's version of it. I know we're just coming out of the Echo Valley Wilds, but they kind of put these two streams back to back. The last one we'll get like this is going to be on Kaineng, but that's after a long wait. I guess it's because it's much more difficult for them to implement content and even the environment for a city zone, so we'll be waiting a while there. But it's Jade Sea week. I know it kind of snuck up on me really, but I figured, hey, let's do a tour. So what you'll be watching, and if you're just a Guild Wars 2 player, hopefully this will be quite interesting to you, is all the regions, like all of the regions and environments of the Jade Sea in the first game. Now, let me just say, nowadays I feel a bit more Kurzaky, a little bit more Echovald Foresty, but back in the day, I was a Luxon through and through. I loved the idea of a petrified sea. I loved the aesthetic of it, how technically they'd managed to render it in-game. I thought this place looked gorgeous. I had multiple conversations, both online and in real life, talking to people about Cantha, just to sell the idea of the Jade Sea, because I thought it was such a cool area of the world. And now finally, we actually get to come back here. Over a decade later, at the end of this week, we're going to see how they've realized it. In a lot of ways, I even said this on the Echo Valley Wilds stream day itself. I was excited about the forest, but the Jade Sea is the main thing I'm curious about. And with this like half depetrification story going on, just what will it look like? So, fingers crossed, they've got some good stuff for us. Now, funnily enough, in the middle of recording this video, the devs put their trailer up for the stream. Now, I'll do a dedicated thing on that probably. It looks like it stirred a lot of controversial response in the community. The Jade in the trailer looks very different, and maybe we can justify that in lore, but people are being kind of mean about it. We'll see what we think. I've had a blast doing this tour. You might see a little bit of buildcraft there as well. I was originally going to shoot this as all elementalists and like big, firebomb stuff. But then I decided to do another concept which I'm quite excited about, and that's like semi-low man. Like the most efficient team that's just a couple of heroes. So you get a lot of loot dropping, you get a high proportion of the gold, there's not too much visual noise, you feel like you're a significant element of it. So what does that mean? Well, I was playing Spirit Spammer. So have fun with that. I haven't played it for so long that it actually wasn't that boring to me. Even through like quite a lot of footage here. And hey, it's another nice touch of Cantha. Now, the reason you're going to see all of that is because this is a super Q&A. We're going to have a lot here of broad discussion about not just Guild Wars, and there are some really good Guild Wars questions coming up. I've scanned ahead and seen what they are, but just general stuff to do with any other projects that have been on my channel, general gaming. It should be a fun time. This is a big Q&A. It's a special edition that I'm hosting questions exclusively from people on Patreon. Like, I'm desperate to find good rewards for people on Patreon and reasons to follow my campaign there. If I didn't have a Patreon, and if people weren't on Patreon, I literally wouldn't be able to do this job. It's everything to me. So I want to be able to give something back and actually do a video for them every now and then. So as you're watching this, if you guys like the discussion, give a big shout out to the people on Patreon who submit these. And if you want to become one of them, please, I do sincerely encourage you, check out the link in the description. You can pause the video now if you like. I put it there under every video, even when I'm not feeling confident and like I don't deserve people's support because I've been too waffly with videos and stuff. But it is always there in the hopes that someone will go to it. So if you do like videos like this, you want to get on the next one because I will be doing more, then yeah, the link's down there. Anyway, enough shilling and plugging on myself. Let's get into the questions and see what you guys have got. First of all, and I think there's like 33 of these. We've got Crystal Bart, who isn't asking anything Guild Wars 2 specific. There's a lot of Guild Wars questions here. They're asking something that's super generic, and I've thought quite hard about my answer here. They say, hey WP, what's your favorite game that you've played this year? So I kind of got a bit blindsided by this, because usually I think to myself, oh god, what games have I played? I'm usually such a mono gamer. I usually fall in love so much with one franchise or another that I'm not doing much else. So here's what I did. So obviously I'm on the new PC, right? And so I went to my Steam library on this PC to see what's installed, and in that way I can see what I've actually been playing, right? At least on Steam, and that's obviously not everything. Guild Wars, for example, isn't on Steam. But here's what I've got installed, alright? And this is just a selection of things. Plants vs. Zombies 1. That's actually a game I've spent a huge amount of time just this month on, seriously. Arc Genesis 2 is installed. I played that earlier in the year. I actually think that was on the Epic Game Store. That's on my other PC installations. I've got Stellaris Nemesis that I played. 2 Point Hospital. I don't think I've talked about it at any point really on YouTube. Sea of Thieves. Some VR games. I've got Beat Saber installed at the moment. Phasmophobia, Propagation VR. Phasmophobia and Beat Saber are the two VR games I go back to over and over and over again. The Master Chief Collection. No Man's Sky. Basically, I played Halo 1 on that earlier in the year. No Man's Sky, I tried a campaign, but kind of burned out and didn't get very far on. Maybe only spent about 20 hours tops. Fallout 76. Don't Starve Together. Half-Life Alyx. Warhammer Vermintide 2. Those are most of the Steam games I can see here that are relevant. There are some other smaller ones like Stardew Valley or like Terraria, which are games I love, but I've done big playthroughs of those on previous years, and my attempts at them this year, I've kind of not played very much. Then obviously there's Guild Wars, Final Fantasy 14, I was playing 12 earlier in the year as well. So of all these games, what's my favorite? What's like the best game? I mean, it would be very easy to say Guild Wars. It would also be very easy to say FF14 now that I'm closing in on 1,000 hours on that game, you know, and it clearly is gripping in some ways. I'm tempted to say Plants vs. Zombies, because I really do think it's a fantastic game. The original PvZ, even though the Steam port isn't very good. In terms of how it slowly gives you mechanics and stuff, I think it's a masterclass. But here's what I'm going to give it to. I honestly think Sea of Thieves is the best game I played this year. I actually started playing it last year, but I put some hours in this year too. And I think Sea of Thieves is brilliant. And I especially want to nominate that as my favorite game this year, because I want Guild Wars players to know about it. Sea of Thieves is the most ArenaNet Guild Wars feeling game I've ever played that wasn't made by ArenaNet or the studio. Like, every philosophy you've heard about Guild Wars, about no gear grind, you know, and shallow progression, cosmetic progression, not shying away from a little bit of PvP and competitivity, but generally having a nice sort of easy access open world, with immersion and focus outside of the user interface. Sea of Thieves is fantastic. I can't talk about it enough. I think in the previous Super Q&A I might have been asked about this as well. But here I am, I'll say it again, and I say it emphatically. Check out Sea of Thieves. If you're a big fan of all those fundamental things about ArenaNet, and you're bored of Guild Wars at the moment, it's a great game to look at. Though I will say, the reason I played it this year was because they did that Disney crossover with Pirates of the Caribbean and Jack Sparrow and so on. And I actually don't like the new patches they're doing. Sea of Thieves is best when you're in the open world and there's a bit of tension and so on, and all the regular mechanics are at play. When they just put you in these little instances where you're just sort of going along on rails, I think those are rubbish. And, you know, clearly they put work in, but it was pretty boring, to be honest. But still, it's very high on my list. All right, next, we have Brett Leary, who says, I know this isn't Guild Wars 2 or Final Fantasy 14 related, but given that you've said in the past that you're a fan of Halo, are you interested in Halo Infinite, since it will be on the PC as well? It's really funny you asked this question. I submitted comments for this Super Q&A basically 2 weeks ago exactly. And I think yesterday, the day before, they randomly released the Halo Infinite multiplayer. It's free at the moment on Steam, on PC. A Halo game coming to PC. So I'm really actually very interested in it. I have a friend who's been streaming it in Discord, and it does look good. I mean, even when he's playing like the small arena stuff, when he's playing big team battle. The only thing that scares me, right, is when I was a big Halo fan, I did play Halo 1 on PC. It had a port. I think it was Gearbox who went on to make the Borderlands games, wasn't it, that did that? And I did play a bit of Halo PC through that. However, mostly, when I was a Halo fan, it was all a console thing. I'm used to shooting with analog sticks. I'm actually not that used to shooters with mouse and keyboard. I mean, when I have played shooters that are mouse and keyboard, it's stuff like Borderlands, where it's more RPG feeling a lot of the time. So anyway, I'm watching my friend play Infinite, and it looks very exciting, but it also looks really hard, because I know I'm not very good at I'm not that good at shooting with a mouse and keyboard. And everyone's so good at the game and so fast and snappy with their movement. And it feels like the guns are not the guns I recognize, you know? I get a sense of, like, the range that I would expect to score kills and the time to kill with, like, a battle rifle at a certain distance. But people are just so much quicker. Everything's so much deadlier. So I don't know, that kind of scares me. The other thing that scares me about it, I mean, I do love it, but I've got a real problem with PvP games. You know, like years ago, right after Guild Wars 2 came out and I got hooked on League, you know, that became a huge time sink for me. And when I get hooked on Guild Wars 2's PvP, and when I got hooked on Guild Wars 1's PvP, and when I was a teenager and I was hooked on Halo PvP, they just become these insane time sinks. It's weird because a part of me is like, you know, I'm in the middle of a huge Shadowbringers project for Final Fantasy 14 at the moment, but there's a funny part of me that's like, I'll just throw it all in the bin. I will happily sit there and stream 14 hours a day, every day, just playing like matchmaker in PvP games. If I felt like people were having fun watching and I didn't have any insecurity about that, I could easily do that, because whether I was live or not, that's how gripped I can get by that kind of stuff. I get crazy obsessed with it. So for that reason, since I don't really have a Halo audience, and since we are in the middle of some other very cool projects to do with MMOs, which we'll talk about in a second, you know, I think I'd best steer clear. But it looks brilliant. I don't know what I think about the story, by the way. I didn't like Halo 4's campaign at all. And I didn't even try Halo 5. And now they're talking about, like, another ring that they're on. And it's, like, not a part of the original 7 in the array. And I don't know, man. I'm bored of Cortana. I was bored of Cortana in Halo 3. Let alone squeeze in another trilogy of games about her. So, I don't know. I'm also not even sure whether they'll do the open worldy style stuff. I know that open world has somewhat been in the ambition of the Halo franchise for years. And, you know, there are certain feelings you got when you loaded in on the second level. The second campaign mission of Halo 1 even at the very start. But I don't know whether they'll really do it that well. So I'm a bit cynical, honestly. However, the PvP looks great. And, I mean, what's cooler than Halo on PC, free, and randomly dropped in? I mean, it's brilliant. Next, we have a Guild Wars question. This is from Jason Ralston, who, by the way, the order I'm doing these questions is just order of posting. So Jason says, and this is a really fun question, if the Guild Wars 2 team went back and revamped one zone of core Tyria, minus ore, which zone would you like them to revisit and why? Oh god, I kind of hate you for saying minus ore. Why are you saying minus ore? Okay, first of all, you say a zone, and then you say minus ore. So you don't want me to do any of the Orion zones? And I'm guessing there you mean Straits of Devastation, Malkor's Leap, Cursed Shore. We're not counting Siren's Landing in this, I suppose. So I assume you mean zones, not whole, like, regions, continents, or whatever. And that kind of sucks, because honestly, I think ore is a great place for the devs to look at. I was discussing this just the other day. I had noticed a commenter on some of my Final Fantasy XIV coverage who said, "Hey WP, I love your playing this game. I quit Guild Wars around Heart of Thorns." And I see that sentiment over and over and over again. People saying, I quit around Heart of Thorns. Now, I actually think that's a really good thing to hear from people, because it reminds me of just how poorly received Heart of Thorns was at its launch, with the requirements to do masteries to progress story. And the mastery XP was calibrated too high for people. And the combat, here's the big one, the combat was too tough for most people. There was absolutely no smooth ramp into what they jumped you up to for Heart of Thorns. Now, can I remind you guys, the first Heart of Thorns beta had really hard enemies in the open world, and then they nerfed them down and made them a lot easier to kill, and even that was still too hard for people, and to this day is too hard for people. People don't know how to deal with bristlebacks, and they don't know how to deal with saurians, and they don't know how to deal with even pocket raptors, even with a lot of the power creep. Now, why do I say all of this? Well, the reason people don't know how to deal with that, and that huge hump exists in Heart of Thorns, is because of the failures of core Tyria in getting people used to what real builds should be and what actual expectations are. You know, it's funny when these elite spec betas come out, and this has happened, God bless Boots, I love him, but this has happened with Boots several times, and many people, they'll say, oh, I'm testing my build in ore. I'm testing my build around Malkor's Leap or Cursed Shore and stuff, and it's just, they're so squishy, the enemies there, and they do no damage, and their animation speed is so low, and they never really have break bars, and they never actually have interesting, like, attacks that you have to react to in any way. So you're just not conditioned for anything that the expansions throw at you. Now, you could say, okay, it's Heart of Thorns' fault that all these players got burned, and I'm only seeing these fans return years later when I go to another goddamn MMO. You could blame Heart of Thorns for that, but I don't. I blame core Tyria, and if we start looking at core Tyria, where do you want to start upping the ante? Do you want to up the ante in Queensdale when people are learning about hearts and renown events and so? Renown hearts, dynamic events? Not really. Do you want to up the ante just a bit later where they're still wrestling with the idea of how the trading post works and how crafting works and what mini pets are and what chairs are and all those other things? Well, not really. To be honest, guys, you want to bump it up around ore. Ore are the endgame zones. So if I could revamp a place now to help with new players, I would do it for ore. I would raise the bar a bit so that it's closer to the Heart of Thorns level of engagement, and also improve rewards, the temples and so on. I'm sad how ore sort of lost its flow as soon as Mega Service came in. or with like the temples, you know, the god temples all used to mean something. You'd collect them all, and that would give you the territory and the space for the main meta in the final map, and give you more lodestone loot and stuff. It was really good before mega servers. I kind of want to see that stuff come back. So yeah, I think just, and if you, basically, if they looked at risen enemies and bumped up risen enemies, then that also can retroactively help the personal story too. Like, if you just take a risen caster of some kind, and you say, all right, we're going to make this basic unit stronger in ABC, XYZ, then suddenly that enriches all of the personal story without them even have to manually do anything. A couple of little tweaks here and there around the Zaitan conclusion stuff could be good, right? So anyway, you say no to all. So then my instinct is to say, well, maybe a starter zone, but we've got 5 starter zones to pick from. So now my instinct is to say maybe Gendaran. I can't even say, like, Blood-Tide Coast, because Lorna's Pass is kind of paired with it, so people might miss out. I think possibly Gendaran is the best bang for their buck. If they want to, like, do tutorials, if they want to, you know, introduce better, more interesting mechanics and stuff and concepts, Gendaran may be the best map, because basically everyone will go through there. And if they weave just a bit more, that's where the ultimate value lies. And really, guys, that is my main, you know, there's a part of me that's a fanboy for Blaze Ridge Steps and just wants to say, oh, do Blaze Ridge, I want to see the shatter really cooler, blah, blah, blah. But I care so much more about the health of Guild Wars now than any of my little fan desires that I think I would just pick, you know, I'll go along these lines that I've been talking at the moment. So Gendaran is probably my answer. Brian says, do you have any thoughts on why Guild Wars, well, they got 2 questions. Any thoughts on why Guild Wars 2 has stayed away from any sort of randomness in any of its encounters? For example, different paths, enemies, traps in subsequent dungeon runs, or world bosses and strike bosses changing up their rotations. There's so much monotony in constantly running the same meta events, strikes, fractals, etc. Why not add in some additional replayability and keep players on their toes? Okay, so the answer to that question, they do, it's weird that you ask that. It's sad that you ask that, because Guild Wars is a game that I think in its fundamentals understood these problems and tried to resolve them. When you look at the design of Ascalon Catacombs with the cave troll that can burst out of different walls at different areas and you never quite know where, and the cave troll can actually fight other bosses. Like if the cave troll bursts out near Lieutenant Kohler, they'll fight each other. You know, that's like dynamic, right? And the idea that then there were going to be different paths and people would vote, and maybe it wasn't a predestined conclusion what path you were going into, so there's a bit of variation. Dynamic events, you know, that we kind of forget that the word dynamic's on there, don't we? I mean, they could just be called events, but they're called dynamic events because there was once a vision for a little bit more randomness and split branching and so on. And it is weird, you know, there's an alternate reality, guys, where one of the ways they took Guild Wars dev was not to mess about with guild halls, and not to mess about with raids, and not to mess about with fractals or any of that. They just dedicated everything to dynamic event infrastructure and dynamic event webs. I'm avoiding the term meta event here. Meta event nowadays we think of as like an on-rail sequence of events. That's not the way they necessarily had to go. You know, Guild Wars understood that. Even in the personal story, the idea is it's a web of different things that might come up that really helps with replayability. But of course, many of these lofty ambitions were not landed on. The game bit off more than it could chew. It tried way too many things, and they've ended up prioritizing other ideas. I do think they still care about it. Like, fractals have a bit of randomness, or variation at least. I mean, they have variation, not randomness. I think they're scared of randomness in endgame because they know it can be frustrating. But they do have variation, and it rotates over the weeks, you know, with the instabilities and so on. So I think it's not for want of trying, but it's very difficult to do. You know, when it comes to like raiding and stuff, there are 2 kind of very different schools of thoughts and types of raid design. There is dynamic raid design, where it's like, okay, if you phase a boss at X threshold, it has a chance to move into this phase, or it has a chance to move into this phase. And like slowly the battlefield like evolves as the fight goes along, and you can never quite predict exactly how it's gonna go. And a part of the fight is learning how to think on your feet and adaptability. That's a kind of raid encounter, but they're very, very, very difficult to make. and very, very difficult for the player base to not end up just cheesing them. So I think nowadays, most of the big MMOs, and you might say this is regrettable, but they do the kind of thing that certainly Final Fantasy and Guild Wars both do, where it's very predictable phases, and it's very predictable animation sequences, and it's all on clockwork, so it's pure science how to beat it. And that takes some of the magic out of it, but it allows them to be, in theoretically, tighter tuned. Not that Guild Wars ones have ever been that tightly tuned, but Final Fantasy proves that can be done. Oh, and you see in editing here, you asked about the Deep as well. The question 2, when it first came out with the Deep, it's probably my all-time favorite gaming experience. How would you like to see it be reimagined, if at all, in End of Dragons? I don't know the answer to this question. For Urgo's Warren, I think I can answer, and I'd just like to see it be a part of, like, the forest that we regularly explore. You might say, oh, just make it a raid. It's because it's a hardcore endgame in the first game, it should be hardcore in the second. But you gotta understand, a lot of the dungeons and endgame stuff in Guild Wars 1 was a very different format, and the elite missions especially. I mean, the Deep and Urgos, they were a very different format. They were like these really long-form dungeons where the tension and the pressure is like, how long can you survive to the end without people disconnecting? Can people commit 3-4 hours in a row without rage quitting and leaving the pug or whatever? And can you actually beat the boss at the end? If you wipe once, you're out. You know, Guild Wars 2 does not support that mentality, that type of gameplay at all. They find it too frustrating, and they think it would burn the user base and so on, and maybe they're right. So there is no real equivalent in Guild Wars 2 for what you experienced back in the day with the Deep. And I don't think the game's interested in going for that kind of thing. So all we have left is the story. And is the story that great? I mean, it's pretty fascinating going into the dark, like, mist near zone and stuff towards the end, the nightmare-y kind of areas. And that could be a really good way to segue into bigger mist stories post-End of Dragons. So maybe they do that? Maybe Living World or something? It's a vague answer. Alright, had to step away unexpectedly for a second there. Let's continue on. That Dang Boy's next, who says, hey WP, I asked this on your stream, but I wanted to ask, I wanted more of an open discussion. What are your thoughts on stacking in Guild Wars 2? And by that I mean everyone in a raid or fractal or strike mission having to stand in the same spot. Usually with a melee weapon right on top of a boss, or hell, even with a ranged weapon on top of a boss, right? Of course, there are more mechanics and times to spread, but generally, stacking is considered optimals. I feel it really kills some class fantasy for me, and kind of makes me less interested in high-end content. I started playing 14 recently, and it's been really refreshing being a black mage, and being able to stand far back and cast as a ranged magic user. It's fun to see all the boss animations and watch over the whole battlefield. I just feel like I can never be a powerful ranged mage or bow-wielding archer in Guild Wars 2 Instant Endgame, because stacking is just so much better than being spread. I'm sort of hoping that they bring a spec to allied targeting to older specs, so that then maybe stacking won't be as necessary. Curious on your thoughts on the subject. And a small follow-up thought, do you think fights are designed this way on purpose by ArenaNet, or do you think the community just found the best way to play? If it's not intentional by ArenaNet, do you think they would ever design fights that encourage ranged, non-stacking strategy was more? Well, I don't think that, if we go back to the actual launch of the game, I don't think that they were actually planning for stacking to be as prevalent, as important as it is in the end. I think they always imagined people collapsing together, like say there's a fire field and we come together to blast it and then we move apart again. But to the extent that it's basically been embraced and sort of just ran forwards through all the years, I don't think they really anticipated originally. They definitely now account for that in their design. Definitely when they're making fractals and stuff, the expectation is everyone stacks together, and that's kind of what the balance is. So I think basically what happens now is you've got content teams that make raids, make fractals and stuff, and they look at the way the game's balance is, they look at what's optimal, they see what it is, and they therefore then build content around that experience. And meanwhile, you have the balance team who sometimes make dramatic changes, but a change on the scale like that would be very, very big, and I don't think they've ever been brave enough or had the resources to do something that massive. So stacking has kind of been the thing. But what you describe, feeling refreshed, being a black mage that you can stand away, I've had that experience multiple times in 14. Like where I'll be wandering around like on a machinist or something, shooting my guns, and I'll think, wait, hold on, should I be closer? Am I doing something wrong? There's like this little thing that flicks up in my mind like, oh, you should be stacking. Your positioning's bad because you should be stacking. And it's like, oh no, there's really actually not that many reasons for it. Final Fantasy does have a few ground targets that you can walk into for like sort of a perk here and there, but they're really rare. And they're not actually, I mean, obviously when you get to the really hardcore late stuff where you're progging difficult content, there's going to be more stacking and spreading and stuff. But generally they've got a really good balance, and for the casual normal gameplay, you don't feel like you're bad just because you're expressing freedom of movement a little bit more. And honestly, you ask me, what do I think about it? I don't think it's that great for Guild Wars. I wish we could spread out a little bit more. I think one of the reasons I prefer World versus World and PvP gameplay is because in those formats, more ranges are more viable more of the time. Like, it would be ridiculous to expect a full 5-man team to stack onto one tiny little point in a game of Conquest, for example. Like, not only do you need to spread across multiple objectives, but doing that in a team fight is just asking yourself to get cleaved down and blown up. World versus World, when you get to and World versus World is the same for roaming stuff. When you get to Zerg gameplay, then it kind of reverses again, and you sort of end up in this stack position again, which I don't like. I don't like it for World versus World Zergs, and I don't like it much for PvE. It's not that PvE is actively bad because of it, but I do think that there's a certain fantasy that we don't really feel fulfilled in the game and never have, and that's probably been something of a detriment. Now, can I imagine a world where Guild Wars somehow like changes and goes back on some of this? Well, I think the direct targeting stuff from the Spectre, if it ends up everywhere, can kind of maybe help, because a lot of abilities that currently are splashes and point blank AoEs and stuff can now be more specifically targeted from range, so you sort of can spread people out a bit more. But generally speaking, a lot of effects in the game would have to have much wider radiuses, and I don't know whether they'd be prepared to do that. There's so many effects and boons and things. I wonder whether having too high radiuses on that kind of stuff would actually just be detrimental for servers as well, because there's so much more maths going on. There's so many more boons hit so many more people because you don't have to stack anymore. So I don't know. The other thing they could do is remove all those kinds of effects altogether and completely rebalance how much like might and fury and quickness uptime and stuff people are expected to have. But again, I mean, this is fundamental, radical stuff. I don't think Guild Wars is in a space to do this, not through the End of Dragons era. Maybe the expansion afterwards, if they start getting a little bit of, you know, breathing room because they produce so much good stuff and the community gets really healthy. Who knows? Eric says, do you think ArenaNet has hidden anything for End of Dragons? Something like the Griffin in the Path of Fire. Part of me thinks that they will have hidden some feature like it, but another part of me thinks they want the expansion to be as successful as possible, so everything is already out on the table. Your thoughts? Well, I mean, it depends to what degree you mean hidden, right? I mean, there definitely are loads of hidden details about the expansion. The story's the easiest place, you can see that straight away. I mean, look at the last Echovald stream. They didn't show very much off. They're that scared of giving us story details, which means that, you know, meta details and all kind of other things aren't there. So, yeah, End of Dragons is going to be full of hidden stuff. Hidden stuff about its story, hidden stuff about its gameplay, hidden stuff about its rewards. You know, how deep will its collections be, and all the ways in which they've improved the format from Heart of Thorns and POF. If what you're asking me though is there a really big, like, single thing that they could be marketing right now, but they're not? Now, that's an interesting question. We did see with the Griffin, obviously, that was like 1/5 of the mount system, except not really 1/5, because the Griffin has so much detail and is so complicated with its movement and has all of its own unique races with it. It was kind of even bigger than 1/5 of the mount system, wasn't it, really? And a unique, cool collection to acquire the damn thing. So, do they have space for that in End of Dragons? I think that they would like to surprise us with stuff like that. I mean, what developer wouldn't like to do it? But at the same time, I think just because they've surprised us once in the past, it shouldn't create this, like, debt and this expectation forevermore. I almost feel bad that they can't just do the Griffin with POF without then immediately getting questions and comments like this, or even just outright expectation that there's going to be hidden stuff every expansion from now on. It's like, let them do something nice on 1x back, and if we get it again, cool. But is this really something we're, so to speak, holding them accountable over now? Is one time a pattern? So I feel a bit leery about the whole prospect. There is also then the context of End of Dragons itself. Clearly, the studio has been struggling ever since the layoffs. Clearly, and then the Icebrood saga as well. We can't know right now just how, like, rushed this X-Pack is, so to speak. But all signs for me, when I look at, like, the way they've done the Elite specs, point to it being more of a Heart of Thorns style thing than a POF style thing. And in that case, yeah, I don't think you should expect anything big hidden at all. You really want to look at that feature list. You want to look at fishing. You want to look at the siege turtle. You want to look at the new elite specs. And you want to look at the prospect of maps in Cantha and story in Cantha. And you have to ask yourself, are any of those good enough for you for the expansion book price? Obviously, there's no sub fee afterwards, but that's it. You know, any surprises we have is because the story is told just that well, and the maps unfold to us and are just that fun to explore, and the rewards are just that good. You know, those are the surprises, the bread and butter of the game experience, rather than, aha, it's not just a siege turtle, but there's also a hidden Naga mount, or there's a shipping feature, or whatever. I don't know what people have in their minds. You know, I saw on the official YouTube channel, people were speculating that 4 Aspenwood might come back as a PvP game type before the Echo Vowed stream, and that's basically debunked by the Echo Vowed stream itself. But you know, that's crazy to me, and that scares me, because that says to me that the idle casual Guild Wars fans that you're likely to find over in the comments of the main trailers, they really have much bigger ambitions and expectations, and they'll easily accept big expectations of this expansion, well over what I think we'll actually get. And this has come from someone who thought that Tengu might be possible right up until the first look. But ever since then, I think I have a pretty narrow idea of what they're going for, and I just hope that what they do really well. Go for the feature bloat later. A quick break from the questions, I guess. Braxel here just has an observation. I can't think of a question. Let me confess instead how my still going interest in Guild Wars started. It was around the launch of Eye of the North. I was 12 or 13 years old, and I got a trial for the game on a CD with a gaming magazine. And the reason for why I actually tried the game then was because on the CD, there was a picture of Nika, or was it Vizu? And the innocent child, me at the time, pretty much fell in love with her. So my experience with Guild Wars started because Nika was the prettiest thing I had ever seen back then. That's wild, man. I mean, it goes to show that if you put a pretty lady on a game or in a case or something, the marketing will do its job. In fact, in honor of this little observation of yours, I could do a Jade Sea thumbnail today. If I don't do a Jade Sea one, I'll have a nice big picture of Nika there for you. And I think it is meant to be Nika, by the way, but they may only have a CGI render of Nika because they did it for Vizu in the opening cutscene. So, I don't know, a bit of both, maybe? And don't feel too bad. If I remember rightly, that shot of Nika isn't like too gratuitous or anything. Einar says, any long-term goals that you want to share either with the channel or in your personal life? Well, oh Christ, I mean, I could talk about some personal life stuff. I think channel is what I want to talk about mostly here. There's kind of 2 things that are going on with the channel, and I haven't really done like a vlog update for a while. As you guys know, I'm refreshing my comments constantly, and the way that I have it set up on YouTube is I'll see messages even on super old videos. I had a message on a super old video like a couple of days ago, and the comment was, this video has not aged well. And I was like, what video is that that's not aged well? And it was a video that I did early last year, right before End of Dragons was announced, or was it the year before that? When the Icebreed Saga hadn't been doing very well, viewership was plummeting, and interest in Guild Wars was plummeting. We'd had a little bit of like quiet time, and it actually turned out this was right before the End of Dragons announcement, though I wasn't to know at the time. I did a video saying, hey, it might be time to unsubscribe. Do you guys remember that? And I basically said, look, you know, I've been covering Guild Wars. I'll be coming up on my 10 anniversary, 10 years of covering Guild Wars. You know, I don't know if we're at the end of the road. I'm not going to stop covering Guild Wars, but I really need to look at other games. And I talked to you guys about the Elder Scrolls, and we ended up going on with the Arena playthrough, and we tried some other stuff. And anyway, so the comment was, this video hasn't aged well. And that was interesting for me to read, because in a lot of ways, I think that's totally fair. Because I'm not in the midst of a ton of Elder Scrolls content at the moment, but I am at least branching out. It's just that it's with Final Fantasy at the moment. So here's kind of what's on my mind. This kind of bleeds into some of the other questions on this Super Q&A actually, so maybe I won't ramble too much. But essentially, here's one of my big ambitions that I've actually been really struck by. And I didn't care about this for years, guys. I really didn't. You know, if you look at that video where I said it may be time to unsubscribe if you only care about Guild Wars, I'm interested in these other things. I didn't give you guys a bunch of MMO projects because I didn't care about other MMOs, really. I didn't care about the MMO industry, really. I like the games industry, and I have certain passionate franchises I cared about. But MMOs, you know, there was at no point through the previous 9 years that I really cared about being like big on just MMOs in general. I mean, really. And it's not that I haven't played other MMOs. I've actually got a few under my belt, but I suppose it's probably the World of Warcraft thing where I didn't really care too much about WoW and the subscription fee thing as well. So that's kind of always been true. But this year, I think that's changed. And what I actually genuinely would really like to do right now, and this is mostly born out of how cool it's been with Final Fantasy, is I would like to basically play through all the mainline MMOs that are out there at the moment and sort of get a sense, because I think a few things have happened. First of all, yeah, covering Final Fantasy has been really fun. People have really rallied behind it. You know, I can actually play through it. There's a start, a middle, and an end. You know, it's not like this unending, ludicrous grind or whatever. There's a clear idea of when I finish the story, I can come back when new patches come out, and I can juggle that game along with, you know, Guild Wars and anything else. It's just play through it and get to the point where you're following the patches. So it's like, it's something you can do. And I don't think I quite realised that about MMOs before. But another thing's happened is, and year by year this goes by, I believe it more, I kind of think the MMOs we currently see in the landscape are not going anywhere. Like, even the ones you might view as really weak MMOs, I don't think they're going anywhere, and they're all valid to look at, even in the long term. Like, Elder Scrolls Online, I think for years, I kind of had the impression of Elder Scrolls Online that it was a subpar Elder Scrolls game that had come out, hadn't really been massively successful, and would now fizzle out, and that was it. That's kind of what I thought ESO would be. But year on year, they prove that that's not the case. They keep putting out content. It's just like Guild Wars, it keeps going. You might not be interested in it anymore if you're not fanatical about it, but it's there and it does a lot of stuff, and it has actually got a big community. So I don't view ESO as going anywhere. Final Fantasy XIV is doing exactly that as well, except even climbing. Final Fantasy XIV's not going anywhere. And even like, I saw a remaster of the Star Wars MMO the other day, BioWare's Star Wars MMO, which back when Guild Wars 2 was coming out, that was what a lot of discussion was about, because, you know, that had a big budget, had a big studio, it had a big IP. It was like the trinity of what you need for a successful product. And, you know, we probably think of SWTOR as a dead game, right? But it's totally not. And they're even talking about, like, having expansions coming out and stuff. And, you know, one of the projects I did last year as well, after this video that hasn't aged well, so to speak, was I did a week in the Lord of the Rings MMO. And that was not as fun as a stream project as Final Fantasy has turned out, but it did teach me stuff. It taught me that game still gets updates. Like, I was lurking on a Jebro stream the other day, and he was playing it because it had added like a new class or something. I mean, it's kind of mind-blowing to me, and I do believe that like these games go on and on and on. You know, I say it as a defense of Guild Wars, and I say, look, End of Dragons can be the start of a new era. We can go for a long time. I'm not just saying that to shill for Guild Wars. It's because I genuinely believe MMOs at this point, if you've already got your claws in, it's a good idea to just keep building and building. It's very hard to launch a new MMO and keep like a whole user base going, as we can see with what's going on with New World. So anyway, for all these reasons, suddenly it seems like a much more rich thing to focus on for a while in your career, you know? And I really, really like the idea of just finishing this Final Fantasy XIV series and then looking at ESO or looking at New World, or looking at what other MMOs. I think even eventually, if I get enough of these big games under my belt and I've covered them and I've done like the occasional reviews on them on YouTube, if I actually start to get into that multi-gaming MMO place, wouldn't it be cool, like super late, to finally look at retail WoW, which is like the last big thing that I've never actually looked at. I mean, eventually, like way down the line. I know some of you guys are going to kind of cringe at that, because a lot of you guys listening to me know retail WoW, and you know that you don't care about it or whatever. But you know, these things are fascinating to me. And now suddenly I'm kind of into MMOs. And it also feels like a logical fit, something I can actually segue into. So I just have a lot of passion for that at the moment. That's kind of a long-term goal for the channel. I would love to finish Shadowbringers, which has just started, by the way, as I record today's video. Episode 1 of Shadowbringers has started. You can check out the VOD and follow that along with me. And, you know, they'll release Endwalker. And after that, yeah, why not explore some of this other stuff? If people come with me. I know, you never know. I might then look at New World near Christmas when all this other stuff's done. and nobody wants to watch New World, or nobody wants to watch Elder Scrolls Online. Maybe the only reason people like watching FF14 is because there's this big hype train at the moment, and because it does do some things quite well, like story, and people kind of like. So maybe this is just a fluke. Maybe there's nothing but dead ends all around me, but you know, I can't think so cynically about life that way. So yeah, I like the idea of the MMO thing. All of that said, there are still other things still on my mind, which the next question can go into. So this is from Chromacron. He says, hey WP, basically I just wanted to say I really miss the projects like FF12. So I know this is kind of complicated, it's got nothing to do with the MMO we've just been talking about, but I kicked it up before then. The 12 series and the Elder Scrolls stuff. So the question, when are these coming back? Maybe even Living World LP or Stellaris? I know you more or less answered this already in one of your streams a long time ago, but I also want to use this opportunity to get those projects back in the minds of your viewers. And see in the comments, so you guys can comment if you think about these, if I'm the only one missing those or not. Alright, so I love all of these projects, and I do want to, well, I love 2 of those projects, well, 3 of them, and I do want to bring them back. What you have to understand about the way I like to do LPs, where I like to do value, and I like to, you know, actually give trivia and do a good pace and stuff, at least in my mind. It takes research, it's a lot longer turnaround to get the stuff out. And people don't generally want to watch it. They want to watch Guild Wars stuff. So what I think I've realized, especially over this past year, is if I'm going to do non-Guild Wars stuff, I should make it the most efficient kind of content I possibly can. Get a lot of bang for your buck out of it. And that tends to mean streaming. Streaming is the laziest, most efficient way that you can produce content, right? Every second that goes into production is a second produced, you know? There's not all these other layers of pre-production and of post and so on. So I think that's why I've kind of fallen into doing a little bit more Twitch at the moment. And I have fun there, and I think they're good shows. The 14 stuff basically is a huge Let's Play. If you guys feel like I'm not Let's Playing at the moment, I really am. It's just I'm not doing like a really structured, like well-reviewed thing. And I wish I could justify that stuff, because that's what I'm really proud of. I like those projects. But, you know, I've got to be honest about the fact that it's kind of crushing when, you know, I can just ramble out some conversation idly about some Guild Wars 2 news and get like 20 times the viewership than what I spend days and days on an individual episode of, say, FF12. So those are my unfortunate, I guess, immediate thoughts with those. But that's not that I'm canning them. There's only one that might get canned, all right? Let's talk about it. It's the Season 2 Let's Play. Guild Wars 2 Season 2 Let's Play. This is the lowest project down on my list at this point. And there are a few reasons for that, but let's be honest about the biggest one. The biggest one is this. What I wanted to do was have a full LP that chronicled the lore of the game, and then when new content was coming out, I could do like let's play style coverage of those patches, you know. So that would be my method of regurgitating the information to you guys, because I found all those kinds of productions really tedious. But now, and this is really unfortunate, but since Dragonstorm, and basically it feels like the studio doesn't really care about the Elder Dragon storyline and they just want to get it over with. I don't really feel any passion meticulously going through all the details about the Morgemuth plot and stuff. As far as I can see, what ArenaNet's gonna do is end the Elder Dragon cycle, you know, the cycle is reborn, whatever, the end of dragons, and then they're going to go into new stories and new stuff that doesn't require all that baggage of old patches. And what kind of audience is there for those old patches? Those videos aren't highly viewed. So as Season 2 was going, my original idea with that Guild Wars 2 LP was, well, look, they're Guild Wars videos, so everyone will watch them. So I can do a really good, amazing LP on it, and, you know, it'll get all that traffic. But realistically, the Season 2 stuff, not many people asked me for, not many people were watching at the time, and I kind of eased off on it a bit, and I thought, well, why don't I do it in just more of a casual way? And that was fine. And then Dragonstorm kind of hit, and I got to be honest, I just don't really care to tell this story that it feels like ArenaNet doesn't care to tell. Not to mention the fact that it's Season 2. Season 2 is full of random story threads that get dropped, and they've openly admitted in their own behind-the-scenes streams that, you know, these plot threads probably won't be coming back, you know, like Rox's old warband mate, or the artifact that the Dermond Priory had related to the next, Queen of Kryta or King of Kryta, or was it Ascalon? And seeing E constantly come up when there was a recent Reddit thread where, you know, one of the devs basically said, yeah, this is totally on the back burner. We've basically forgotten about it. You know, I'm just not passionate about Season 2, guys, right now. I'm really not. And I'm somewhat sorry about that, but that's why that series is lowest on my list. If I'm gonna spend time Let's Playing and doing that stuff, I'd rather do it in other franchises that grow me and actually, you know, build this platform and build this channel to a certain degree. I'd rather it be finishing FF12. I'd rather do a Season 2 of Stellaris. Now, you mentioned Stellaris there. Oh, God, you have not seen the loops I've gone on in the background trying to make a cool mod list and a cool little setup to do another Stellaris playthrough and updating my race pack and so on. I did a couple of streams on Stellaris, but I don't know. I feel like it works a bit better on YouTube. I feel bad about my original Stellaris playthrough because I think it's good, but it was also getting really long and I could see that the end game was going to be a slog and the videos were going to get really bad. So I kind of rushed it to conclusion. And I still remember somebody saying to me, oh, you can tell WP's bored with the game now. And it wasn't that I was bored. It was just that I knew I had to close the series because you would get bored. It honestly would have been so grindy. So you have to get like the mod list just right. Or you have to... So anyway, I kind of want to do that. That's still something I'm vaguely passionate about. But the big two is FF12. You will see a conclusion of 12. I will be doing it. I still love Evilis. I haven't like formally ended it. The only reason that went away was because my PC started exploding and breaking. And now that I've got the new one, again, it's like a mod and a weird install thing that I've got to set up. And it just kind of ended up on the back burner. That's the only reason that went away. And we'll do Daggerfall as well. The one big like change that I want to do with my practices at the moment is I can't trust myself to have breaks in these series. I can't trust myself. I think it's happened too many times now. So I think for the future of my Let's Plays, whenever these projects return, and hopefully some of them won't be too far away, I'm not gonna... what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna produce it all, basically. I'm gonna produce the whole thing on my own time before you even see a single video. And then once the uploads are going up, it's because the project is done. For Final Fantasy XII, I gave myself a 20-episode buffer. And I still ran out, and there ended up being a break. So I'm just going to shoot the whole series, and then I start posting to YouTube. I think that's the best way to do it, and I might be able to find a really good balance. And I know, as a Let's Play viewer myself, I know how fun it is to watch a Let's Play and get the sense that the guy recorded it on the day. And, you know, maybe he'll see your comment and be able to respond and so on. And I will respond, but actually in the video, you know, that your comment might impact the videos. But that style of production is just too dodgy for me, you know, it's going to lead to gaps. And the other thing I've kind of realized now is if you want that immediate reaction, if you want to influence the content, if you want to feel like I'm there and talk to me, well, that's what Twitch is for, right? You know, you've got two very different types of shows. And you may as well double down on what each one's strong at, right? So stop trying to make the Let's Plays more audience interactive. Just shoot the whole thing, you know, research the whole thing, edit the whole thing, produce the whole thing, and then just have it like on scheduled uploads and interact with the community in the comments and stuff as they come out. That's the way I'd like to do it when I pick those back up. When it will be, I don't know. I have no hard and fast plans because right now what I really love is this MMO thing, as I mentioned. So hopefully that's a nice big long response. I'm sorry it's buried in a video like this, but instead of, you know, a dedicated YouTube vlog, but there you go. That's what the super Q&As are for. And thanks for the question. Next, we got a Guild Wars 2 topic from Sean Collins, who says, hey WP, I wanted to hear your thoughts. It might be a rehashed topic though. In my opinion, all endgame modes in Guild Wars 2, that's fractals, raids, and strikes, are really just the same thing and should be condensed into one system, preferably the fractals one. Fractals, short encounters of various flavors, and then a boss. Raids, several short encounters, each capped with a boss. Strikes, basically no encounters, save the 2 strike missions, which people hate doing, and then a boss. To me, these things could easily fit into the fractal category and use the fractal menus and the fractal currencies. I think it would just flow so much better. Stage 1, oh, you're ready for endgame? Please try 5-man fractals. Stage 2, cool, you've hit tier 3 5-man? Congrats, you can now do 10-man, which would be the strikes. And stage 3, wow, you're in tier 4 now. Now you can do long-form 10-man fractals. That's currently raids. Everything comes back to fractal currencies and helps get ascended gear for horizontal progression with other characters and builds, just like the raid and strike currencies currently do. From a story perspective, it makes sense too, since fractals are basically recurring points in history that can have lore relevance. Raids are exactly this, and strikes are like recently current event story bosses. You could scale the current fractals to fit 10-man content pretty easily if desired. It's not like precise tuning really matters too much given power creep, etc. Fractal level can be easily expanded to be a real kill-proof system for 10-man content. And difficulty can be scaled with tiers CMs. Am I oversimplifying everything? Am I the crazy one here? I think you're crazy to assume this is an easy and obvious solution and easily implemented. And that's the thing. I mean, when it comes to ArenaNet, if it's not easily implemented, it's going to be agonized over and probably not happen, right? I think you are onto something, all right? Look, I do like the idea of a really clean end game where it's very obvious where you go and what you do. That's one of Guild Wars' biggest problems, people not knowing where to go and what to do. If you had like a single infrastructure, and within that, all the rewards were properly laid out, it was all the same vendors, it was all kind of the same currency system, there is an elegance to that, and there is a value to retention to that I think would be brilliant for the game. I really do. But I think you have to design from the ground up to do that. Retrofitting everything into it at this point, I don't think that would be worth all the effort to finagle it. And there's another little issue here, and that's that you have the game and the systems and what they essentially are. And then you have their branding, okay? And the branding for raids is a very important brand to have for the game. If they just grandfathered everything into fractals and that word raid no longer existed in Guild Wars 2, as shallow and as stupid and petty as this is, it would mean Guild Wars 2 loses players because they would ask, does Guild Wars have raids? And they'd say, no, it's got this fractal system or whatever. You know, people want to hit... That's the reason why they moved on from dungeons to raids and from 5-man to 10-man in the first place. Purely for that brand power. And that's the reason why, even now, with the End of Dragon stuff, where all they've actually committed to is strike mission content, they're still too scared to announce that they're dropping raids. There's nothing wrong with dropping raids. If they're doing hardcore CMs, that basically is a raid. But they're scared to drop the term because they know that there's a certain brand to the term raid. And there's a weird thing going on with ArenaNet too, where they're like trying to double dip. They're trying to have all the pulling power of raids, but then they're also trying to have strikes with, you know, they also know that people are scared of the word raids. Casuals are scared of the word raid. So no, we'll put you in strikes instead so we can have clear, there's no preconceptions. We'll go in with a clean mind and empty expectations and therefore maybe hopefully love it. So they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. So there's all this other stuff too that kind of makes it messy. Not to mention the fact that I don't know whether it really is simple to just make fractals 10-man. But it's a cool idea with the tiering you've got. I mean, there's a lot of potential in the fractal system, and I do love fractals. I think that they're, because of how clean they are, and because of the infrastructure, and that variance I mentioned in one of the other comments today, I think for all those reasons, they are my favorite area of endgame in Guild Wars 2. But maybe they can't be the be-all and end-all. Oh, and while I'm at it, there is another little thing, by the way, which I've argued with people for years on, and I'm changing my mind on now. I don't know what it is exactly. But people have often said Guild Wars needs dungeons back. And I've said, no, fractals are brilliant. And then they come back to me, they say, oh, but fractals are bad in lore. They're just like in the mists. I want a dungeon. I want it to be actually tied to current lore. I want it to be somewhere actually in the world. And often I've argued against that. And I've said, well, that's so arbitrary. Who cares? But people say, no, it's really good. I kind of sort of am seeing what people were saying there. I'm imagining, guys, imagine if End of Dragons came out. You know, we were talking about a hidden feature a minute ago. Imagine if when End of Dragons came out, you opened the Canthan world map, you zoomed out, and you saw on each of the maps, one in the Jade Sea, one in the Echo Valley Forest, one in Kaineng Center and City, and one on Xingzhou, you saw those little dungeon icons. Like the classic dungeon icons. You just saw them there. Wouldn't that be so thrilling? Wouldn't you be like, oh my god, there's dungeons. I wonder when the story takes me to them. I wonder what happens in them. You know, there's something really thrilling about that. The idea that the expansion comes out and just at the same time 4 fractals have got dumped in at the same moment, that's not as compelling to me. So I kind of like the idea of dungeons too. I know you didn't even really mention them in your comment there. You've just assumed that they're fully dead, but there you have it. So it's an interesting idea. It would take a lot of bravery and a lot of, you know, knocking down walls to fix things. Which I don't know whether ArenaNet are going to do. There's one final note I have for you guys on that whole point as well. You know, they're talking to us about how, you know, that Guild Wars 2 is what they're doing and End of Dragons and it will go on and blah, 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 blah. But I haven't seen them really be brave with any patch yet or any announcement of a patch. And I think there's a lot very broken about Guild Wars that takes real bravery, real ripping things up by the roots and shaking things up, like how the daily system works and like how gear works and all the ascended stuff. And no, the legendary armory is not a good update when it's only applying to people who've grinded so much. I want to see that kind of access come to regular players, so Buildcraft is available in a easy, proper capacity for regular players so that we can actually embrace that part of the game more. I don't see the devs doing any of this stuff, you know. I don't see them fixing economies. So I still kind of feel weird. I don't know what their end game is with Guild Wars, because them being timid on all of those fronts still kind of says to me, surely it's because they're working on another game they want to move us to. And aren't we then in the exact same position we've been in since goddamn Path of Fire released and during Season 4 development, when they were secretly going to put us on something else that failed? Great. Amazing question here from Nisogra. This is honestly all-time one of my favorite comments I've ever had. Not just on a Super Q&A, on any video ever. What do you think of the news of Little Big Adventure 1 and 2 going open source? And do you have any plans on doing an LP of them or streaming them? Wow. Okay, so I've clicked the link in your post. So first, let me just introduce everyone to this topic. You know the music you hear at the end of my videos on the end slates, every video? That's from a game called Little Big Adventure 2. And it's like one of my ultimate nostalgia trip games. It's not necessarily an amazing game, but it is one of my favorite all-time games ever, because it was a game I played as a child, one of the very first 3D games that I ever played. And I just have an unbelievable nostalgia overload whenever I interact with it and hear its music and its sound effects and so on. To this day, there are certain like sound effects that are in big sound banks and libraries that you might hear in films or other games that Little Big Adventure 2 used all the time as well. And whenever I hear them, I'm like, oh, that's the magic ball sound effect from Little Big Adventure 2, or oh, that's the dart sound effect. So it's just like an ultimate nostalgia bomb game. I've had two projects in mind for about the decade that I've been on YouTube, right? One of them is a pre-searing Let's Play. And I've always thought that I would do a pre-searing Let's Play where I cover all of that content the moment I choose to quit Guild Wars as a franchise. The last thing I'd ever do in Guild Wars as a franchise is a pre-searing Let's Play, because, you know, I'm very exhaustive in all my content. I cover every bit of every game, but I never actually cut. There were two things I didn't cover in Guild Wars 1, PvP and pre-searing. And I started at pre-searing, so I like the idea of ending with pre-searing. That's one project. The other project I've had on my mind for these 10 years is Little Big Adventure 2. And the criteria for Little Big Adventure 2 is I'll do Little Big Adventure 2 the day I feel successful, the day I feel like I've made it, the day I feel like I've got a really big current audience that are really excited and interested in what's going on, and I've been doing variety gaming stuff. At that point, I would love to do Little Big Adventure 2, because I wouldn't want to do it early where, you know, a ton of people might end up missing out. I'd want to show the world the game. That's kind of my thing. And so, you know, so far I haven't had the confidence to be at that point. So one day, I swear I would love to. I think it would be really cool, but I don't want to do it too early, you know. I want to keep growing and I want to hit a good point and then we can do it. But this news that they're doing a third game and that the games have just been released open source, I had missed all of that. I had no idea any of that was happening. That's why this is one of my favorite comments ever. You've taught me something amazing there. So I do know about various mod projects from Little Big Adventure, and I do know that last year there was like a GoFundMe or a Kickstarter or something about like a new reorchestrated soundtrack, I think, which sold quite well. Because these are quite fringe games. They're actually French games. I have played the first one as well, but the second one's really my favorite. So, you know, I don't know how much people in the Anglosphere are especially familiar with them, because we were playing localized ports, you know. It really did strike me that Little Big Adventure was over, you know. It was just one of many, many, many games from the 90s that never continued along. If you saw my Azaric playthrough, you know, that's another thing where it's like that could have been a huge franchise and just never ended up. Even though they're good games, they don't end up quite going the distance. I never would have imagined they'd go further with it. Honestly, I'm a little bit cynical about the idea of a third game this late. I would be scared it would be a bit like Yooka-Laylee or something. You know, try and recapture the spirit, but the gaming has moved on so far that they don't quite nail it. What mechanics do you keep? What themes? What ideas? I think the idea of being in that kind of world, I'm still really excited about. It's a world that feels a lot like a modern, contemporary living environment in the first world, right? Where we have cars and shops and pharmacies and stuff, but it's inhabited by anthropomorphic animals, so it's kind of like a bit of an Animal Crossing kind of vibe, I suppose, in terms of like texture. And I think that could still be fun, and that could work well, but how exactly does the adventure side of it work? How deep do you go with the plot? Because they kind of paired it with like quite intense story about, you know, dissidents from an alien planet fighting back against like an illegal invasion and stuff. So I don't know what they'll do. But I'm really excited just about the idea of it going open source. Who knows? Maybe there'll be some mod projects. As small as the games are, there have been some, and now that they can do whatever they want with it, that could lead to some good times. At least something that improves the lighting engine, right? I mean, that's one of the big things. So yeah, really, really cool. And sorry to rant about that so long about a game none of you guys know, but hey, maybe you'll think about this the next time you're listening to my end slate music. Mahio says, Alola, WP. I know this subject might get annoying, but with the Generation 3 legendary weapons, which I understand that people are upset that they're gonna be gem store skins, as they say, but I'm legit surprised we're even getting new skins in such a way. As I've even said in Discord that I thought the next generation weapons would basically be exactly like how the PvP and World vs. World legendary armor, where they're the same as the Triumphant Heroes and Mistforged armor skins, but you'd be upgrading the Mistforged weapons or Obsidian weapons to legendary status. Oh wow, I mean that's a very cynical take. Sorry, what you're saying here is that you thought End of Dragons would release new legendary weapons, but it's just the World vs. World and PvP ones being fully tiered up. I mean, that would, and there's no skins at all. I mean, that's a useful function in the game, isn't it? They could probably do that. But I think people do want skins. I'm really still not very happy about the legendary weapon thing. The conversation about it has completely died down. But I think Guild Wars was at its most healthy during Season 3, POF, and Season 4. And what did that era have? Aside from consistent releases, each release had a new legendary. And I'm not crazy, right? I'm not shouting into an empty room. It was definitely really badass when you logged into Bitterfrost and you saw Shushadu and you wondered to yourself, oh my god, am I going to actually craft this thing for this patch? And when you saw your friends list, there were those certain veterans and those certain members of your guild and, you know, the really dedicated people who you knew, oh, they're working on a legendary this patch, so they're online a lot this patch, you know, and they don't do it every patch, it's still kind of your choice. But that was a big thing for the game. And now it's like, what? We're going to get a whole set instantly? It doesn't even have like that living world trickle-in value anymore. And the whole set's going to look the same. I mean, we mentioned on a recent Q&A video that maybe dyeable weapons will be something that sort of salvages it, which I think is maybe true to a certain extent, but I don't know. I think it might have been best to just not do legendaries at all if they were going to go for this. Or maybe focus on the other categories again. Focus on an aqua breather. Focus on back pieces. Go back to back pieces, because like the achievement section for legendary backs looks absolutely ridiculous right now. There's capes, right? And all the cloth physics and upgrades that came in throughout the POF era. Why don't you go for a full legendary cape now? I don't know what it's going to look like since the gem store's already exploded them over, but maybe there's a chance there's something there. What about a legendary mount? I don't know what it looks like since the gem store's already exploded them everywhere, but maybe they can do something there. Again, this is what I mean by ripping up at the roots. If they looked at the mount system and they said, okay, we're going to add saddles and we're going to add like hooves or whatever, we're going to actually add gear for our mounts, well, now there's a bunch of new things you can do and you can put legendaries in there, but they're not doing stuff like that. Interestingly, by the way, I haven't talked about the whole mount saddle idea since their revelation that End of Dragons itself will have a Springer and a Raptor. So maybe that's not totally off the table. It's a weird thought, isn't it, guys? Does that mean every expansion from now on is going to have those two? You know, assuming there's going to be one after End of Dragons, and I hope there is. There's some other weird questions to answer as well, like, let's say we're like 3 expansions down the line after all this is over with End of Dragons. Are people still having to go back to play Corner to get a Roller Beetle? Are they still going back to Dragonfall and therefore all of Season 4 to get a Sky Scale? Despite the fact that Season 5, 6, 7, and 8 exist already, it's still just Season 4 that's the big special one. I mean, given enough time, I assume they'll add alternate paths for all of these mounts, right? In fact, they should probably be somewhere in Corteria so that they don't have to keep doing it every new X pack. And once we're there, maybe yeah, there's some kind of item system update is warranted. Alex Bush has kind of a weird question because I sort of dedicated a video to it, I think, since they posted this. Oh, in fact, they might have actually messaged me elsewhere saying disregard because you've just done a whole video. Whatever, we'll do it anyway. Hey, WP, I have enjoyed the Elite Spec tier list videos, and they've made me wonder what fantasy playstyles would you still like to see in the game. Well, so yeah, I did this video of saying let's double down on existing specialization lines and make them elite, because they would all produce amazing themes, I think, anyway. It's like the idea of the Pyromancer, basically everything that was on that list. And what I provided there is 45 elite specializations, like almost off the top of my head, and I would love all of them. Anyone really curious and who hasn't seen that video, but that might be listening to my voice right now, I really do recommend you pause this and go to my channel. Check just a couple of videos ago. I did a video talking about elite specs and a concept they could roll with, because I really do love all those ideas. But to go a little bit further, you know, my new player guide saying what class people should pick, I honestly think I stumbled onto it in the middle of that video, but it's really true. Guild Wars doesn't have, like, the cleric, like the holy, the priest, you know, the sort of holy feeling caster from the back. If you want that vibe, if you want that holy light, sort of radiant idea, then you have to be on a Guardian heavy armor, and there's this idea that is paired with the front line. And I think that's a bit of a shame, and there's really nowhere else that matches that. A Water Ellie doesn't match that. A Druid Ranger doesn't match that. A Scourge certainly doesn't match that, and probably no Necromancer ever could match that. Even if they did an antonym Necromancer spec, I don't think it quite works. So yeah, like that Seraph kind of idea, I think that would be really good for the health of the game's population too, so I'll sponsor that as an answer. Oh, I also had a little moment on stream the other day where I was talking about this exact topic, and I got out like a lute, you know, one of the instruments in the game, and I just started strumming it. And the animations all look so cool, so I'm going to say Bard as well, because I think Bard could so easily be put into the game. You know, End of Dragons is reusing animations everywhere, right? Look at how cool all the musical instrument animations are, and there's all those models and stuff. They could make a Bard class out of all the existing animations and instruments, but just put them in, like, combat capacity. They could do it, and it could be really rich, you know, different. Like, imagine a Bard elite specialization for, I don't know, the Mesmer or whatever, instead of the Virtuoso. And what its utility type was kits. And each kit is equipping a different instrument. And then, you know, you can strum it and stuff, and it's all different. They would work so well. I mean, I had that brief moment on stream where I strummed away, and it's been stuck in my head ever since. They look so good. But I guess either the team never thought of that, or just didn't care to do it. Kent Barron says, if you could lift one system from Final Fantasy XIV and put it into Guild Wars 2, and vice versa, which would they be? For me, I would give FF14 Guild Wars' die diversity and die channels system, and I would give Guild Wars 2 the emote variety and G-pose of FF14. That's interesting that you say that. You seem very, like, fashion and roleplay and sort of character conscious to me. Those generally aren't where my priorities lie. It's funny you say G-pose. I think that the idle cam feature in Final Fantasy is really good. If people haven't played the game or don't know, it's a little button that you can click. And what it will mean is, and it can automatically come up while you're AFK if you like as well. What it will mean is the camera just latches on to random characters or mini pets or just movement in the environment, and it will watch them cinematically. And you have like a little bit of control, but it will have like nice depth of field and stuff. And it just pans through like a slideshow almost. But it's real time, it's actual footage of what's going on near you. So like while I'm streaming the game, whenever I go AFK, I put like the idle cam on, and it works really well. I wish it was there in Guild Wars, but that isn't actually what I'd pick. That's just what G-pose makes me think of. This is a really easy answer to me. There's a lot of things you could choose, but I would say I would take Final Fantasy XIV's coherent daily currency system, whereby every day you can log in and you have the roulettes, and it's easy matchmaking into party-based stuff that builds groups and teams, and social connections are forged, and there's an easy to understand currency that gets you all of your gear easily. All of that is really robust and amazing clarity and brilliant. If I could take all of that infrastructure and dump that into Guild Wars 2. so that no one ever wonders, what am I supposed to be doing? They can just do a Guild Wars 2 roulette to work for the Guild Wars 2 currency, because resonating slivers actually matter, or achievement points actually matter, or whatever it is, right? If I can solve that problem, I'd do that in a heartbeat. And I think Final Fantasy XIV has solved that problem with its stuff. So that's what I would do on that direction. On the other direction, I'd put Guild Wars' combat into Final Fantasy. I mean, if I can take more of the open world exploration and jumping puzzles and all the other amazing stuff the game does too, buildcraft, fine. But just action, weightier, non-GCD based combat. It's not even about tab target or action based. It's GCD based versus not GCD based. And I think that's what matters more to me. But the way that the animations actually connect, Guild Wars has so much better combat. It's unreal. It blows my mind that it's even like a debate. But a lot of Final Fantasy players say their combat's better. It's better tuned, and it's better animated, and it's cleaner, and, you know, it's way tighter for progression. So all of that stuff's way better. But the actual fundamentals of fighting are brilliant in Guild Wars. So I'd take that across. Just that, you know, that fundamental baseline experience of moving around a lot, interrupts a lot, lots of ways to knock around and manipulate your enemies, move fast, hit in different ways. Yeah. That's the trade I'd make. Joris says, second question, if I may. My current favourite MMOs are 14 and old school RuneScape. My first game. In a lot of, well, original old school RuneScape, whatever we call that. You can't even call that RuneScape Classic, because RuneScape Classic was something else that existed back in 2007. In a lot of ways, these two games are a bit antithetical of Guild Wars 2. But I want to focus on one thing in particular. It's something I wonder about often, and for a long time, the idea of respecting your time. It's going to be an unpopular opinion, but I think an MMO lifestyle game, or whatever you want to call the aforementioned titles, really can't do both. Respecting everyone's time and giving you enough game content goals to be a lifestyle game seems to be opposed. I bought into the idea when I started Guild Wars 2 at Head Start, but recently learned I'd rather choose how to spend my time in a massive game rather than do everything there is and then jump up and down in the major city. It's born from trying to have everyone being able to do everything, but blah blah blah, I can go on. You get my point. You yourself has made it countless times, so here's the question. How would you respect time, or wouldn't you? And how would you marry that idea to the massive multiplayer online lifestyle RPG idea? I'm not only referring to the gear treadmill though. If there's none of that, how do you incentivize your players in your ideal MMO? Alright, well, two things. The way my perfect MMO, and I've kind of got like a world building project going on where I'm sort of inventing one for funsies in paper form, not in reality, but just as like a fun exercise. It is actually very replay based. I know that's not everyone's cup of tea, but you know, if you're advertising and making a point of that at the start, so like I like the idea of having lots of classes, lots of character types and styles and aesthetics and starting locations maybe. And the idea is that you replay a lot. You can play the game, put it down, come back later, pick up a new character, have that whole adventure again. You know, in the earlier question where I mentioned I picked up another Terraria playthrough, you know, some people clock way more hours in a game like Terraria than they do in an MMO. And it's not that they have permanent long-term progression. It's that they'll play through it, they'll go through everything, they'll say that was a really cool campaign, they'll put it down. And then they'll come back and just do it again. And they won't start from their old character. Not typically, I mean, some people might to a certain degree, but you know, people are playing because they like the fundamentals of actually just experiencing and climbing through the game. And when you can build a game that's that robust and that clean, then yeah, I think suddenly replay works very well, and that can work on the MMO stage too, but I think people kind of forget it. They like permanent progression, they like progression becomes identity, and I think that that's a mistake that MMOs make. So that's kind of what I'd do for an ideal MMO, but go into this idea of respecting time. I think there's lots of ways to do it, and look, I think that the biggest problem that's actually happening here is the way in which we communicate about these topics. And it's not entirely the fault of the communities, it's even the press from, you know, just like ArenaNet gave for Guild Wars 2. What do I mean here? Well, let's look at Guild Wars 1, because I think it illustrates things very well. Guild Wars 1 respected your time, but then Guild Wars 1 also didn't respect your time. See, there's no such thing as the whole game respecting your time. That's lazy thinking. That's lazy analysis, and that's just a sloppy tag that we put on the box to try and sell copies. But when you actually look at it, Guild Wars 1 was incredibly respectful of your time if what you wanted to do was beat the campaign and hit level cap and get a build or two. It was very, very good for that. Guild Wars 1 was not very respectful of your time if you wanted to go for prestige cosmetics. If you wanted obsidian armor, it was not respectful of your time in the slightest. It made you pay to go into the underworld, and if you wiped, you lost that money and that was it. And they had trolly, horrible wipe experiences like lay in on the underworld, not to mention all the grind for the obsidian shards and the ectoplasm. If you wanted some of those titles, like Grandmaster Treasure Hunter, something I can personally attest to having ground out myself, it was thousands, hundreds, if not over 1,000 hours of tedium, like pure tedium. That didn't respect people's time. But see, Guild Wars 1 kind of understood that it wasn't entirely labelled as a game about respecting your time. It was understood that there was no grind and stuff for like that main campaign or whatever, and then if you wanted to keep playing and the progression side of stuff was interested to you, that's where they were happily gonna, you know, put the pressure on you. With Guild Wars 2, we're all a lot more lazy, and we're a lot more, like, pulpy about how we talk about it. Oh, the whole game's respecting our time. But again, it is a melting pot, just as its predecessor was, just as all MMOs, as big and vast, as complicated as they end up. Guild Wars 2 doesn't really respect your time when making a legendary, and I would argue it shouldn't respect your time when making a legendary. When I see all the complaint threads on Reddit and on the forums about how difficult it is and grindy and blah blah blah, you know, this is pre-armory for what it's worth, because the armory has thrown a complete spanner in the works, and the armory has completely turned this on its head. But for all those years, I kind of thought, well, yeah, but that's the prestige late game thing. You know, they never said it's a low grind game in every single aspect. But people forget these things when they run out of things to do, and now their last recourses are only matters of grind. You know, ultimately, one of the biggest reasons that I detest the armory is it is saying, hey, let's take these features which historically we said were side content and we made outlandishly difficult to get and really, really out of reach of most people. And we coasted for years on good press about respecting people's time because this was a sideshow. Let's take this sideshow and make it the be-all and end-all. And there's something kind of grotesque about that to me. I get what that means for the player base and retention, and I get that people like to have gold. Believe me, I get that. I'm someone who's gathered many of his own legendaries and will continue to. But there's something wrong about that progression that doesn't sit right with me. And that's before we talk about the practical buildcraft stuff and accessibility of content, which is probably the more meaningful discussion to have as far as the armory is concerned. Looping back to your comment, you suggest that you can't have a lifestyle game that also respects your time. I disagree. I see why you've come to that conclusion, but I think it can. It just needs to be clear with its players, hey look, this is an area of the game that's meant to be grindy, and that's okay. We're not scared to put a bit of grindy stuff in here. We're not ashamed of this bit being grindy, and if you want to play this bit and experience that grind for long-term progression, here it is. For everyone else, the vast majority of the gameplay is going to respect your time and give you access to the major story beats and so on. You know, you've got to remember a lot of these quotes, especially on ArenaNet side, the context is that they're knee-jerk reactions away from what World of Warcraft was doing, where it would lock major story beats behind raid progression. You know, which, it's not a coincidence, you've never seen Guild Wars 2 do. They've done minor side story beats as a part of a story progression, stuff that you can easily skip or will be recapped later, and I know that's kind of stirred the pot a few times, especially with the Sol D'Alessio stuff, so let's not get into all of that. But that's the kind of thing they're talking about when they say respecting your time. But now the discussion's got to this quite lazy place where people just want to say, oh, the whole game needs to have absolutely no grind and we need to have instant access to everything. They don't want it to be that all you've got left is to jump up and down in cities, of course not. And you can have a game that has its cake and eats it too. It just needs to be clear with the community about what it's doing, and don't be ashamed when you're asking for more effort from your player base. Markantbot says, if we get to expansion 4 in Guild Wars 2, would you rather have a new profession or more with 3 elite specs, or would you prefer to sticking to the current system for expansions? Oh, that's a tricky one. Well, actually, no, it's not a tricky one. I think the new profession. I can't believe I'm saying this out loud. I think the new profession. Look, when you say sticking to the current system, does that mean the elite specs have to be as bloated as they are? And does that mean they're all going to be like End of Dragons-y feeling ones rather than POF or Heart of Thorns-y feeling ones? I think I'd rather a new profession. Now, that might sound weird. You guys have heard me for years saying a new profession is bad for Guild Wars. But let's be clear. I was saying a new profession is bad for Guild Wars because of the extra workload that would put on elite specs. You know, if they're struggling to do 9, they're going to struggle to do 10 They're especially going to struggle to do 11. What about 12 plus a class at once? You know, it's just crazy. It's just, they can't do that. That was the argument. But if what we're saying instead is get rid of elite specs altogether, but just have a new profession that might have a couple, now that's a different world, and I do buy that. I'll give you 3 big reasons why I buy that. First, marketability. I think a new class immediately makes more sense to total outsiders and lapsed players than just elite specializations. That's the first thing. Second thing, it's new leveling. All the arguments and all the beliefs I have about new races applies here as well. Of course, there are side tangents we can get into about level 80 boosters and tomes, which would also be addressed and so on. But I do think, as we clearly saw with even back years ago, Heart of Thorns and the Revenant, let alone after all these tomes and scrolls everybody's gathered ever since then. But that's reason 2, the new leveling, and it's kind of the new race argument. But here's the third thing, the elite specs for that class. I'm a really big believer in putting elite specs out throughout Living World. I'm serious, and I think we could have been close to another reality where the Icebrood saga goes on and on and on if the devs had committed to doing that. Why am I a big believer in that? First of all, balance. If you look at like the end of Heart of Thorns, they actually got to reasonable world versus world, and they actually got to reasonable PvP balance. And then POF came in and threw it all over the place. When End of Dragons comes in, they're dropping 9 at once. It throws it all over the place. If they release just 1, then they can say, oh, it's overpowered, it's underpowered. They can tweak it. The baseline doesn't wobble. It doesn't, you know, it's not throwing a stone in the lake. It's throwing a little pebble in there, and everything settles down nice and quick, right in time for the next one. And you can actually granularly adjust things. So balance is one reason. Another reason is it would just make Living World actually look really exciting and as big as expansions. I mean, half the reason why people are interested in X-Packs and stuff at all is because of elite specs right now. So imagine if they were filtering over the patches. That would be so powerful. And finally, it would allow the whole team to have like a specific focus on one elite spec instead of 9 at once. So you probably get a higher quality spec. Like, think about how some of the POF specs had good lore tying them to the desert, and then some of them really didn't, and it was a bit of a shit show. And some of them had really good mechanics, and some of them were worse, or just weren't working for a long time. You wouldn't have that if they were laser focused on each release. You know, it's like, okay, we get a release where we go to the Matani Keys, and this is where the Sunbather elite spec comes in, and it's all about sunbathing and getting those UV rays, which you then channel back at your enemies to blow them up with solar beams, right? And all of a sudden it makes sense because it matches that specific patch, and you know, we're meeting Sunbather elite specs while we're out on the beaches. It works. So it'd just be so good. You know, people would just be so excited about Living World if there was an elite spec in one. You would be following it. You really would. Now, here's the thing. Classically, there's a problem with this suggestion, and that problem is, well, if they can only do 1 at once, and I'm a necromancer, what if the necromancer is the last one in a row? So it's like with the legendary weapon thing. Do you guys remember when you'd see a legendary weapon come in and your main characters wouldn't use it, or you didn't care about it? It'd be like, oh, I'll have to wait for the next patch. Like, how many of you were waiting for Exordium forever and ever and ever and ever? Because all you really cared about was the Greatsword after all. You know, you'd have a similar thing for the elite specs, but even worse. Because at least you can use lots of weapons. But if it's not your class, and you only play one class, which, as bizarre as it is for Guild Wars, a lot of people are in that position, then you're screwed. And we're talking about Living World patches here. That could be, what, like 2-3 years before your spec comes out? And also that, like, then locks ArenaNet into this horrendously long period, where it's like, wow, we have to do all these episodes, all these releases, so that everybody at least gets one, otherwise someone's going to get left out. And that's just like a nightmare. That's all a terrible situation. That's the classic problem, though. We're talking about a new profession that gets elite specs over the Living World following the expansion it was dropped in, right? So the class itself comes with the expansion, and then the first episode is one elite spec, second episode's another, and so on. Now, in this world, that's not a problem, because we all know it's just the new class, and it's catching up. And presumably, while we may not all main the new class, a lot of us will have recently picked it up and been interested in it and possibly engaged in leveling it up and so on because, you know, it's a feature of the game and it's Guild Wars and you run out of stuff to do quickly, so you will have done it. So everyone will have a bit of an investment in this thing and hope that the next elite spec clicks it into the playstyle they want. I mean, how good would that work? I want you guys to imagine as well. Think if Rev didn't already exist in Guild Wars and then this is what they did. And each patch was a different legend with a totally transformative new like playstyle for it. That'd be so cool. So yeah, that's what I think. I'd pick the new profession at this point and I'd filter its elite specs over the upcoming season. Next we have Jens, who says, "Hi WP, let's say hypothetically that End of Dragons is a massive success and Guild Wars 2 will live on to see its 4th expansion. Let's also assume this new expansion is introduced similarly with a Living World season bridging the story of End of Dragons and Expansion 4. ArenaNet is now finally finished with most of the material it inherited from the first game. All continents are traversed. The dragons presumably have been taken care of. The cultures of all major races have been explored, whether sufficiently can be argued. Sylvaria technically not Guild Wars 1 inheritance, but oh well. Well, they are as much as the Elder Dragons plot is. Human gods have come and gone. Joko's done, etc. This means, for the first time, the current ArenaNet team is relatively free to think of new continents, new races, new stories with new threats. However, there's still Utopia to consider, which never went much further than a concept, if I recall correctly. If you're on the team, what would you choose to work on, Utopia or a completely new expansion? What would you have your priority for world building in this expansion? Region, new races, main threat culture, and do you think anything completely new you would love to see appear in the world of Guild Wars 2? And lastly, do you think the escalation of threat sizes we've experienced, the Elder Dragons as literal world-ending entities, would be a problem for creating a new threat that can be considered on par with current threats we face in Tyria without going Dragon Ball Z route, in which new crazy strong bad guys keep popping up from completely new worlds and dimensions in order to justify new growth curve in the heroes? No, I don't want to see us go the Dragon Ball Z route. You know, I like the idea that Mother explains something more about the origin of the Elder Dragons, but I don't want to see us go power level ring up, which is what ArenaNet's been doing since Guild Wars 1, you know. It started with the Char, who were beaten by the White Mantle, who were controlled by the Massat, who were beaten by the Titans, who were agents of Abaddon, who supposedly pales in comparison to the Elder Dragons. What's above the Elder Dragons, right guys? No, I think I would like to see that stop. When I honestly think about where I think Guild Wars was most rich, where Tyria was at its most fascinating to me. I've said this many times before, and I'm sorry if people are hearing me repeat myself here, but I think it's about 50 to 100 years before Guild Wars 1. So, like, literally the Guild Wars, and I'm not saying that because, you know, the title of the franchise or whatever, but I really like that early space the game was in there, where there were, like, dwarves, and dwarves had their own thing going on, and their own civil war, and their own kings, and their own ideas, and there were 3 human nations in Tyria alone. There was a lot of stuff. There were the Tengu Wars going on in Cantha. There was, I actually couldn't tell you off the top of my head what was going on in Alona. Perhaps this is, Joko's probably in prison at this point. It might be an era of peace for them at this point. But there's a lot of rich stuff going on, especially the idea of Kryta v Ascalon v Or with the druids at the Maguma jungle. Had they disappeared already at that point? I really like that time period. I think that like, what that is that civilizations, and that's politics, and that's actual war and antagonism between people. There's lots of backstabbing and lots of like big figureheads all at play there. And in theory in Guild Wars 2 there's just as many. It's just what Guild Wars 2 did was it said, okay, there's all these big societies and they're of different races. And here's the big theme: togetherness, friendship, teamwork. Let's all be friends. So, you know, the humans aren't at war with the Char anymore. And, you know, the early world building had the idea that the Norn were mistrustful of the humans, but that's not going on. And the Asura aren't really manipulating everyone and pulling everyone's strings, are they? Not really. They're just inventors. And the Sylvari aren't really, you know, sleeper agents of an Elder Dragon anymore, because we've resolved that story. So what are they doing? They're just kind of wobbling around. So there's no tension. There's no stakes. There's no back and forth anywhere, because of this like whole togetherness theme was fully resolved in core. Now, I think it's a brilliant theme for a story. It's a bit banal, it's a bit boring, we see it everywhere, right? But I think it's a fine theme for your MMO, and it's a cool story to tell. But really, that was something that should have spread out. The idea of the Pact, and the Pact actually working as an initiative, that should have been a story that's only just finishing now at End of Dragons, right? We should only just now have started to get people together. Like, this should have been what the game is about, bringing people together. But what they did was they brought people together in 2012. And now Guild Wars as a setting is like fangless, you know? There's no tooth to any of it. So they got two ways. They can try and put those teeth back in by breaking down everything that they've set up this whole time. And I know that certain people would find that an abomination and they wouldn't like that. Even if it leads to better storytelling, it's not what they want. Or they have to take us somewhere new. So I personally, I'm not saying time travel or anything like that. And I don't necessarily like the idea of alternate realities. I want to go to a new continent. And I don't care what biomes are there. Not really. I don't care what cultures are there. I don't care how they speak. I don't care what their buildings look like. I don't care what they look like. Are they humans? Are they races we've never seen? Just whatever is new feeling, so I feel like I'm on an adventure, and has some tension back. Introduce me to multiple new societies if you like, but they have to be detailed. It's not like Heart of Thorns, where we get the Nuhawk and the Itzel, and oh, is there an interesting interplay here? No, because we don't really get to dive in or explore it. I want really not just a continent. What I want is like a multi-continental region, just like we had with Tyria at launch, where there's space for 3 or 4 or even more of these big societies. But then we're kind of just like shunting everything over to the side, and that doesn't make sense. I think core Tyria still needs to matter. So maybe the best thing to do is actually to just zoom out a bit, you know? Introduce a society on the western coast of the Tyrian supercontinent next to the Maguma jungle. Just zoom out the world map a bit. And this will probably happen if we zoom out towards Cantha anyway. Zoom it out a bit. Put someone there, right near the Maguma jungle, that maybe can jostle around near Ratasum and the Grove. Put someone, you know, introduce something at the Isles of Janthir and have them immediately start ping-ponging off of the humans and of the Norn. Have the Ash Legion homelands in there and actually do something fun with them, and maybe have some kind of insurgency story there, maybe roll Bangar into it. Do something with that. Look at the Awakened, look at the Unchained, have them rising powers. And maybe you can start to put Guild Wars into this place where I once upon a time found it most fascinating. Short of that, I honestly think it has to be fun little sorties on other continents that we just hope can be deep, and will always feel disconnected from core Tyria. Or it's going to be a Guild Wars 3, isn't it? And Guild Wars 3 is either set super far in the future or back to one of those cooler areas of the past. I don't know what else they can do. I mean, a Mist's alternate version of Tyria is your last chance. But, I don't know. I have misgivings on that one. Brixie says, this isn't a question, but last night I had a dream in which you were streaming gameplay of something like Final Fantasy XIV with a total conversion mod taking place in Tamriel. That's quite funny. You know, I actually, once upon a time, was very serious about trying to recreate Tamriel. This is during Guild Wars 1 days. Recreate Tamriel in Oblivion. Here I am in editing. I mean Tyria, obviously. Recreate Tyria within Oblivion's engine. When I was into Oblivion modding. And then, after Guild Wars 2 came out, and I realized, you know, projects like that, they're just too big. You'd never be able to do them. I had another idea, which I thought was a more humble idea, and I never really put any work into it. But I liked the idea of data mining out all of the assets that make up Ascalon Catacombs and doing a single Skyrim mod. And the whole Skyrim mod is one quest, one story. Well, not necessarily one quest, but, you know, a selection of quests around one location, and it's the Ascalon Catacombs. Except, you know, within the province of Skyrim or something. I like that idea as well. So, you're going on about FF14 here. For me, it was a bit more of a Guild Wars thing, but I've shared some similar thoughts. Matthias Plan says, will you ever continue the Living World Let's Play? I kind of answered this earlier. Hopefully they listened already. But, yeah, it's very, very low on the list. If there's any that there's a chance I just won't go back to, it's that. I do, as an addendum to my previous response, look, guys, if End of Dragons knocks out of the park, if it redeems the whole thing with Dragonstorm, if it was really, really amazing, you might see it will light a fire in me, and I'll want to share the whole story with the world, and it will pick back up. But as it stands, viewership, effort, enthusiasm, they're all very low. What can I say? Nature Cat says, after your big full game comparison of 14 and Guild Wars 2, I've been wondering about what you value in a game's story. So, what's been your favourite story beat in both FF14 and in Guild Wars 2? And could you do a quick compare and contrast of them? Doesn't have to be a big or important moment, just your favorite. Oh god. They're so big though. There's so much you could talk about. Well, for Guild Wars, oh, this is funny. The first thing that springs to my mind for Guild Wars is actually Aureen's death and resurrection. I know that's a controversial moment for most people. People who really like the idea that she was fully dead or whatever. You gotta understand that I was never in the camp of thinking she'd be fully dead. I mean, the theories about Joko's lichness and the idea of ascension and, you know, requiring death and all that kind of... It was all beautifully written. And it was all very transparent. And, you know, if they were going to do a story of Aureen dying, they wouldn't have cut it off in the middle of the... If she was going to be properly dead, they wouldn't have cut it off like a cliffhanger. They would have actually done due diligence. There was just no way ever I entertained that Aureen was dead. So I never viewed it as a slap in the face when she came back at the start of the next instance. Because obviously she was going to come back. What it was a story about was about sacrifice, and it was a beautiful way of weaving the Joko stuff into an otherwise completely unrelated feeling story, right? Actually tying the Joko stuff into Aureen's battle with Kralkatorrik was really cool. So I thought that was very elegantly done. I appreciate that's a bit controversial. Speaking of Joko, the Joko cutscene, again, that's controversial. People didn't like Aureen eating Joko. But I mean, and let's just put that aside. Maybe you like that, maybe you didn't. But what about the rest of the scene? The whole monologue and everything was all fantastic. I know people feel that Joko wasn't necessarily fully utilized, but I do think there was good storytelling there, and I do think the way through Gandara, there was good storytelling on display there as well. I actually think Season 4 was full of good stuff. Another thing that springs to my mind is the start of Season 4. Probably my favorite instance in terms of story gameplay. Bastion of the Penitent was a real hype for me in terms of story and gameplay weaving together. I mean, wow, what an incredible release. But also, you remember that instance where you're busting Zaim out of jail in Daybreak, and you're in your cell, and they remove bits of your UI, and they pull your camera in the FOV, and you get a special action to break through the door, and that changes based on your profession, and you walk out, and like the game feels totally different there, and it feels really immersive and really cool. If all the story instances in Guild Wars felt like that instance, I'd be over the moon, because I think that's a fantastic instance. So maybe that's a big example for me. I don't know what you're looking for though. When you say story, I mean, what do you want? Sad moments? Do you want to talk about gameplay, executing story, twists? When it comes to Final Fantasy, I mean, I'm just all over the place with that game because I don't know why even, but some moments just really get me pumped. Like Estinian. I don't think I was that connected to Estinian as a character throughout Heavensward. I mean, he was alright. But you know, he went he was in hospital and recovering and so on. But that moment in Stormblood where suddenly the Heavensward theme, the previous expansion's theme kicks on, and then it's not actually the Heavensward theme, is it? Is it Estinian's own music? Anyway, that iconic music kicks on, and you see Estinian standing there looking at Shinryu. I mean, that was so cool. That stands out. That's one of my first thoughts. I'll tell you what as well. I know that Yotsuyu is quite controversial among Final Fantasy XIV fans. But I thought that was a masterclass, man. I loved what they did with Yotsuyu. She was so hateful. I hated Yotsuyu. And I loved hating Yotsuyu. It was so fun to hate Yotsuyu. And that scene where she's shooting Gosetsu, who I loved, bang, bang, bang in the chest 3 times while he's trying to save you. I mean, it's kind of a bad cutscene in some ways. But God, I loved that whole story there. Yotsuyu was really good. And what was even better was when she came back. And, I guess these are spoilers here, I suppose. And she, like, got the mind of a child. That blew my mind. Basically, I think all the moments at the end of credit scenes in Final Fantasy, where they were, like, flashed to, like, some of these other characters are really good. They're just very good at characters in that game. I love all the frenemies they have as well. I love Gaius Van Baelsar. I love Nero. And basically any random cutscene that shows them after a credit scene or something is obviously going to be brilliant. Definitely nothing in Realm Reborn though, and nothing in the first half of Heavensward. That's all pretty mediocre, I think. But when it starts getting good, I mean, I'm enjoying it. I will say as well, I experienced a certain scene at the start of Shadowbringers now, right before recording this video here today. And that's like a really infamous scene. It's a very dark scene, and I know the Final Fantasy player base loves it. I don't know whether it's because I was semi-spoiled on it before I experienced it, But it didn't actually resonate as deeply with me as I think it did with everyone else. I think people like really look at that and they like nod and they say, yeah, this is Shadowbringers. This is where Shadowbringers starts. Look at how dark this is. But to me, I don't know. I mean, I think Final Fantasy's been pretty dark many times before they asked me to euthanize a small child. You know, those adult themes and tones have been pretty apparent ever since, you know, we saw a dragon eat a woman to like merge their souls in what was essentially something akin to a sexual act, right? There's a lot going on in that game that, you know, I feel like this didn't stand out as much as I thought it was going to. But there you have it. Also, I have to credit Final Fantasy XIV for creating the cutest creature I've ever seen in any media ever, and that's Alpha from the Omega Raid series. Oh my god, that chocobo is cute. Cuter even than any baby Quaggan I've seen, which I also think are pretty cute. Next, we have a message from Jay, who says, I enjoyed the Elder Scrolls Arena playthrough. I'd love to hear see the second game or some of the oddball standalone ones in the future. Also, do you run as a hobby? Well, I've already kind of answered the Arena thing. My plan with Elder Scrolls, by the way, is to still do all the weird side games as well. I wanted to cover the franchise in order as it came out, because those products are fascinating to me. Do I run as a hobby? I don't run as a hobby, but I do have an exercise bike. Does that somewhat count? I mean, I get some cardio in, but not really running. Samwell Rogley here is a very cynical, sad person. Let's see what they say. Hello, WP. In contrast to some Guild Wars 2 players, or ArenaNet themselves, I like the Elder Dragon story, and I would like to see it done right. And I am still salty about the conclusion of the Icebridge saga. Have you ever thought about some plot twists that you would like to see regarding the Elder Dragons in Guild Wars 2? Some that would make for an interesting story and eventually lead us to a specific end. That end being no more Elder Dragons, 6 dragons but sleeping, or something like that. Some suggestions. Zaitan will be or already was resurrected by his own necromancy. Inspiration like Joko's stuff. Joko's line, the rumors of my immortality are drastically underrated. Morgemoth will suddenly begin to talk in Aureen's mind. Inspiration, him being the mind dragon and Aureen absorbing much of his power. The Icebridge saga, Primordus only being the shell of the smaller Guild Wars 1 Primordus, and that he has survived Jormag's suicide attack. My inspiration for this is just hoping. And finally, Steve is a Quaggan who just got really angry. Inspiration, all signs point to it. I know that these suggestions would cheapen their defeat in the first place and force us to deal with them again in some way, except Primordus, to whom we could do justice with his resurrection. P.S. I always hated that none of the dragons mentioned the others. I mean, Morgemoth could have talked to us about how foolish and careless Zaitan was. Kraukatoric could have name-dropped the dragons whose magic torments him. Jormag could have told us about how the defeated dragons are nothing in comparison to Primordus. Well, Jormag did talk about Primordus. Of course, you don't have to go into everything I've written. I don't want to fill the Q&A alone. Well, no worries about that. No, I don't really like any of these ideas, to be honest with you. I think that we are where we are with the Elder Dragon story now, and either they go back and they sort of put their hands up and they say, look, we tried our best with Zaitan, we missed this step here, or whatever. We're happy with that, though. We tried our best with Morgemoth, we missed, we're happy. Kraukatoric, we think we did really well, and we're very happy with that. Primordus and Jormag, unfortunately, have had a bit of a shit deal here. Don't worry, guys. We're going to redo Champions or something like that's short of that. That's the only thing I can imagine ArenaNet doing. That I would accept, and I'd just love to see a do-over of that patch or an expanded variation of that patch, like a remastered version of the patch or whatever. I mean, it's this wild idea, though, because they're getting all their ducks in a row, and they're not in a comfortable space to even begin thinking about stuff like this, I don't think. You know, just let them get the goddamn End of Dragons expansion out and something steady after that. Let them think about Living World Season 1. Let them think about Super Adventure Books, The Other Worlds, and so on. And now we're going to throw this on the table as well, but I would like to see that. In terms of actually progressing the story now, to say, oh, they're back, blah, blah, blah. If they do something really intelligent with the Cycle is Reborn line, maybe there's a world in which the Elder Dragons are back and it's fine. If they do something really intelligent with alternate realities and other versions of Tyria, maybe there's a world in which the Elder Dragons are back. But in neither of those cases do I really think that satisfies how I feel about Champions, to be honest with you guys. And I'm cynical they can do it. I think it's best for us to just come to terms with it, guys, and just move on. Just get to some new stories, into some new areas where new players don't have 10 years of baggage to learn about, and just start over. All right, same game, but a new era. And maybe that's the thing to do. I mean, that's where I've been putting myself to ever since earlier in the year when Champions came out. If they turn around and they do a massive rug pull, and it turns out we lost to Jormag and we were asleep, and the start of End of in the ice, and the start of End of Dragons is us being thawed out 75 years in the future by old man Ritlock, and a bunch of people are dead, and Jormag almost took over the world, but the deep sea dragon fought back, and now we're here and we're fighting again. If they do something like that, that would be the greatest thing I've ever seen in a video game story, let alone an MMO. And it would also allow them to redefine the tension and the factions and conflicts and people who inhabit the world too. So it'd be a brilliant move. But for some reason, I don't have my hopes up. Jormag and Primordus are dead. I hope you like playing Hungry Hippos. Next, this person chose to be anonymous. Hey WP, how are you? Because you guys can do that. If you do join Patreon and you want to support these videos, you don't have to be showing your identity on these. Hey WP, how are you enjoying 14 so far, story-wise and gameplay-wise? Will you do a story review before starting Endwalker? Was the best time to catch your streams on Twitch? And are you planning on creating any more 14 videos for the main channel? Thanks for all your hard work. As you can tell, I'm really enjoying the diversification into FF. And I hope your Twitch channel keeps growing. Yeah, Twitch is weird. It will grow, but like Twitch is a hamster wheel, man. It's crazy because like you get a bunch of subs and a bunch of support and people will be really nice. And then of course the month ends and it slips back. So it's like shoveling snow while it's still snowing. And so even after doing it for like 2 months now, a month and a half, I don't know whether I really am growing, and it's like it's a big like anxiety point. So again, guys, if you want to come to the Twitch streams, please feel free to. As for Final Fantasy, well, you posted this 2 weeks ago. I have now done another video. I did a discussion. For more points of the review, I was playing with the idea of doing Stormblood versus Path of Fire because they're the same era. But I don't know if there's actually that much more I have to add to the discussion I ended up having on the original review. You know, like most of the differences between the games I've already illustrated. And that doesn't change much at POF v Stormblood, not really. In fact, the games kind of just double down into what each game respectively was better at doing. And then, of course, the big difference is Shadowbringers versus Icebrood Saga. And there's a big difference there, but that's almost like such a big difference. You can't do a video on that. You can't do a review. Not really. I mean, it's just going to look like a joke, and it's going to be, I mean, maybe you'd say even unfair to ArenaNet, who ultimately did the Icebrood Saga as a backup plan after layoffs and stuff, so I don't know whether that's really fair. However, once I beat Shadowbringers, Endwalker will probably be out already, so maybe once I beat Endwalker, I'll do a total story review? I kind of have this predictions video for Shadowbringers that I might do, where I list out all the plot points that I was thinking might happen in the X-Pack. So when I beat the X-Pack, maybe I'll go back and we can sort of compare and contrast or something. I don't know for sure right now, though, because, you know, if I don't know much about the game, I feel nervous talking about it too much. And there's a lot I still don't know about that game. Snoover says, so, I really love Guild Wars lore and world building, and I often imagine it being turned into a really great TV series or movie. Do you think Guild Wars could be turned into a successful show, movie, anime? And if so, which story arc from all of Guild Wars 1 and 2 would you pick to present in said show? And also, if I may, which character would you like to voice if the game was turned into, for instance, an anime? I'm not really an anime lover. I've seen a few anime. I don't really get all the hype and the excitement and the enthusiasm, so I don't know whether I could really answer on those specific grounds. I know that's not the only thing you're asking about. In terms of making a TV show, I kind of have this weird thing in my head, right, where I think something could be a trilogy of movies or a 10 parts or a TV show where each of those movies is a 10 episode season and then it finishes. So for example, The Lord of the Rings, I think that you could take The Fellowship of the Ring and make a 10-part TV series, like a HBO style series. And then you could do 10 episodes on The Two Towers and 10 episodes on The Return of the King. And I think you could have a really good depiction of that story that would sit in a nice space between the book and between the film, you know, and you'd actually get some opportunity to embellish and stuff. It's not just trilogies either, for what it's worth. Like Harry Potter as well. I'm quite a big Harry Potter fan as far as the books are concerned. I think the movies fly by way too quick. I think they're a bit campy. I don't really like a lot of the acting in them. I'm not really a fan of the movies. But you know what? One of the things I love about Harry Potter and Hogwarts in particular, as you get this impression from reading the books, is that it feels like home. Like I'm nostalgic about a life I never lived. Like I reminisce about like sitting around in the Gryffindor common room and stuff, or like taking owls or training for Quidditch as the rain's pouring down or something. You know, it's like really homey. It's like lived in, okay? And you know, that's not a life I actually lived, but you get such a visceral, powerful experience from like these boarding school stories. The movies can just never give you, and that's like what I really cherish about Harry Potter. It's not exclusive to Harry Potter for what it's worth, but that's what I really like. Now, if you did this 10-part series thing again, I think you could actually start depicting that. So the Philosopher's Stone becomes 10 episodes of a mini-series, and then the Chamber of Secrets is 10 episodes, and Prisoner of Azkaban, and so on and so on and so on. So then we get to Guild Wars. I kind of feel like the same is true, but here's how I would think it. My classic idea has always been, if I was going to do this, Nightfall is my favorite story. Nightfall is my favorite product, just in terms of how the gameplay and everything works, and all the loot and everything's just brilliant in Nightfall. But the story itself's pretty badass too. And I've always imagined you could do Nightfall as a trilogy. The first episode, the first part of the trilogy is basically the Istan story. It introduces the various characters. It flashes sideways to both Vabi and Corner. It explains some of their politics a little bit. But mostly we get to know our heroes, the conflicts against Corsairs, the ultimate discovery of this plot with Varesh, and the brewing of war. And I would like have the movie end right as the war begins, as Cormyr sends her navy across, and that's probably where you'd end. The next movie kind of does, you know, that Lord of the Ringsy thing, where the first one sets up your big band of adventurers, but then you break them all apart, because of course, you know, this assault goes wrong at Gandara, and all the Sun Spears get spread out across Corner. So what I would do at the start of this movie is now what I would now call like an end game moment. And by that I mean, you know, at the start of Avengers Endgame, they go to fight Thanos, and you really have no idea what's about to happen, and they chop his head off, and it's like, whoa, what? This happened? Right at the start of the movie, and the screen goes black, and then it says, what is it, 4 years later? I can't remember the time jump. And you're just completely untethered at that point, and you're fascinated, and you want to keep watching. I would do, when I used to think about this, Endgame obviously didn't exist, but I would have a moment like that, you know, where you think everything's set for winning this fight, but the fight goes wrong, and then the movie's untethered you, and you don't know where you are, and you don't know what you're doing. And you watch all the individual groups of survivors do their things, the eventual stuff with Vabi, the actual beginning of Nightfall, and this movie would end somewhere around the pursuit of Varesh Ossa and the releasing of Palawa Joko. And movie 3 is, of course, you know, the grand climax, the assault on the realm of the god and so on, and all the dealings and with Palawa and the stuff in the Desolation, and the conclusion of the Centaur story and all that. So that's a trilogy to me. I think that works as a trilogy really well. And, you know, the final one is our characters coming back together, deep revelations about people with us who have been there from the beginning, like Dunkoro's backstory with his son. It works. So then we come to the TV show, and I would do the same thing. It's just I would have each movie is now 10 episodes. I'd have 10 episodes, a season deals with Istan, and then I'd have 10 episodes on the next bit, 10 episodes on the next bit. The other thing is you could do prophecies, I think, as well. And if you were doing seasons, I think you'd have like a season in Ascalon. But to be clear, I'm not going to drag this out too much. It's the searing happens like at the end of like episode 5. Like halfway through, the searing happens. And then the other half is after the time jump and Rurik and Adalbern falling out and, you know, the eventual exiling. I think the first season ends with Rurik being exiled, something like that. Or maybe you actually even get into the Shiver Peaks. Maybe the first season ends with Rurik dying. You do a bit of a Ned Stark moment, right? Because that's like, again, whoa, what are we doing? And then it gets kind of tricky because Prophecies is really wild and all over the place. But maybe doing a TV show of it actually kind of helps, you know, in those regards. You really get to spend a lot more time in Kryta before you're suddenly off with the Shining Blade. You get to spend a lot more time with the Shining Blade before you're off in the Crystal Desert. And the attack on the Henge of Denravi gets shown better. Yeah, you could be a lot more intriguing, and you could do fun stuff with Marcus and stuff before he betrays people. I think there's definitely potential there. Alright, I've talked way too much on this. I like the idea of adapting Guild Wars into other stuff, because fundamentally, I think a lot of those stories are really cool. For Guild Wars 2, it's a lot harder, because the Commander is a bigger character, I think. So what are we doing? Are we doing a story where the Commander does exist? Well, what are they defined as? Or do we just try and tell the whole story where the Commander's not there? You can do that for the Guild Wars 1 main character quite comfortably. It's a little bit trickier to do in that game, though. So I don't know how that looks. But a story about the Orders, maybe? A TV show about the Orders? I always love, like, Stargate and then Stargate Atlantis, and they cross over. So what if we do 3 separate TV shows? They all have different vibes, but they're in a shared universe. One of the TV shows is a spy show and a subterfuge show with the Order of Whispers. One of them is an adventuring and archaeology show with the Dermot Priory. And one of them is like a battle, you know, cinematic, you know, action kind of thing with the Vigil. And every now and then, the characters cross over and we do it like that. You know, it's a Casualty Holby City thing. Pretty good? Yeah, maybe we'll do that. Kai Neal says, inspired by your recent 14 review, if Guild Wars 2 were to get its own version of the Gold Saucer, what would you want to see there? Great question. I think you'd have MOA races. I think you'd have Polymock. I think you'd have hub access to all the activities in the game. And when festivals come around, that rotates. So snowball fights can be played there during Winter's Day. You know, the Halloween stuff, Reaper's Rumble and that, the Labyrinth. And maybe you have like spectator lobbies for it as well. I think you have like those little mini games like the Yojimbo game that they have at the Gold Saucer, where it's like a mini like little last man standing King of the Hill type thing. I think you could definitely copy that across. I think you'd fill it with jumping puzzles as well, because, I mean, nice try, Final Fantasy. You've got jumping puzzles in your one, but Guild Wars 2 is so much better for jumping puzzles. So you do stuff like that, jumping puzzle races, adventures, where people actually, like, you know, compete against one another. Those are the kind of things I'd do. And I'll tell you what I'd do as well. Adventures like Archery Shootout, which was given press before the game released, but never ended up there. And Bar Brawl, which never ended up there. And maybe some of the other Heart of Thorns ones. You know, basically all this little leaderboard content in the game. Let's see it all in one place. Maybe quick access to various races. And yeah, a currency or some fun reason to do it all. I still don't think it would come out as good as the Gold Sorcerer is in Final Fantasy. There's just so much budget and incredible stuff there. But, you know, the Guild Wars 2 one would be pretty good. Okay, we're at the 2-hour mark here. Just a couple of questions left. Kai Neal again says, so far all the elite specs have either a head, shoulders or glove armor piece with their elite spec. With End of Dragons, this means that each class will have had one of each. Really? Is that how they're doing it? They've been slowly adding each piece, have they? What do you think they'll do with the next set of elite specs, assuming we get some? Yeah, assuming we get some is kind of a funny thing. You know, after I talked about elite specs on that other video, so many people were saying, hey WP, you know, there's that rule of 3. You put 3 in and people aren't very excited by the 4th. You know, that's why you have movie trilogies and stuff. There's something psychologically going on there. I wouldn't be surprised if ArenaNet ends it. A lot of people were saying stuff like that. And a lot of people were saying they were okay if they would end it too, which really surprised me. So assuming we get another one, what kind of gear would they give them? I don't know, just expand into another piece. Chest, legs, boots. One of those, right? I mean, why not? I've always kind of wondered why they limit it to head, shoulders, or gloves in the first place. They're like the small pieces, I suppose, and the hideable pieces. But, yeah, maybe they just go into other areas. Frankly, you know, I think often about how low my expectations have become over the years. I remember thinking it would be a whole set of armor. You know, I didn't think that was too much to ask for. Guild Wars 1, obviously there was loads of sets of armor based on class and stuff. They're doing an expansion. It's only one elite spec. Surely each one will get a whole gear set. No, it's just one piece of gear. And I don't know. Now I don't really think about it at all. That's a really interesting question to be asked, to be honest. I never in a million years would have thought to open a conversation about that. But yeah, I guess they'd just do another bit of gear or they'd loop back, repeat something. Tessalian has a very long message. They say, what do you think the bare minimum for an expansion needs to be? Or to expand the question, the future of the game in general, particularly as it comes to new features. This is something that's been worrying me watching responses to End of Dragons information. I'm not too excited about skiffs. I'll hold my judgment on fishing, but as for now, it doesn't interest me. But the thing is, I don't really care. New shiny features generate hype, but I don't think they're necessary, and in some ways they may be damaging. I'm worried about the future state if every Living World / expansion has to keep one-upping the previous just to maintain interest. The closest I came to quitting Guild Wars 2 was around the Icebreed Saga announcement. Shocking, I know. I didn't realise it before that moment, but so much of my enthusiasm of the game relied on long-term goals. Chasing achievements, working towards legendaries, map story, completing every class. The announcement that there may be no more expansions destroyed my confidence that there was a long-term. From that, my requirements from the future are relatively low. An expansion every few years that has a solid story, a handful of maps, elite specs, and long-term goals. Living world episodes in the interim on the level of seasons 3 to 4. But as far as features go, I don't need them. We have enough mounts, some of which already step on each other, Jackal versus Raptor. I don't need more keybinds. Masteries have been underwhelming. If the developers come up with something great, then throw it in when it's ready, but I don't think it should be an expectation of the community of every major update. One of the biggest complaints is ArenaNet neglecting old content, fractals, dungeons, raids, core maps, while demanding new features in parallel, and I'm worried that we're starting to get features simply to meet these expectations, not because they're actually needed for the game. This will only spread out development further and does not seem sustainable. This isn't just a Guild Wars 2 problem, but I wish more people could say the game is good and I just want more of it, rather than constantly demanding new flashy feature bloat. I'd also like to think dropping some of these features allows the devs to focus more on improving core systems, rewards, events that could be bundled in as core updates along with the expansions. Basically, I don't have high expectations for End of Dragons. I don't think it's going to be groundbreaking like mounts with POF or gliders and map structures like Heart of Thorns, but I feel like I don't need to. The simple announcement that an expansion was coming was enough for me. If it has good story, 4+ maps, elite specs, that's all I need to believe the future of the game and feel like long-term goals still have value. Alright, I agree with you completely. I feel bad that I probably can't express well enough just how much I agree with every sentence that I just read in a huge wall of text. It's very rare to go to nod my head to every single bit, but I completely agree with you. I think that there is something weird going on with Guild Wars. It's born out of the fact that we've never really had regular expansion, predictable expansions. The Heart of Thorns was transformative, the Path of Fire was transformative, and now people are thinking End of Dragons does. But the thing is, people think End of Dragons does because the previous were, not that it needs to be. And they think that it needs to be transformative because a lot of people, right, here's the brutal truth. A lot of people are questioning whether they care about Guild Wars at the moment. And a lot of people are wondering whether it's doing enough for them. And they're kind of forgetting, or they're blind to, and maybe they're right in this, but they're kind of thinking that these past 2 years, the Icebreed Saga years, they're thinking that this is par for the course. So they're kind of like, they're not settled with the game. And then they're lashing out at the expansion because they're like, oh, well, the expansion's supposed to add features. It's got to re-enkindle me with the game. And then they don't see the big obvious thing on the list where it's like, oh, this will re-enkindle me with a game. So I think it's a mix of those two things. Previous precedent, but also the game's just in a rocky place. So people have forgotten what it means to just sit down and play a huge chunk of decent new story, decent new exploration all at once. They've forgotten how that feels. They've forgotten that just what Guild Wars 2 is can be satisfying. And so, yeah, I agree with you. I don't think every single expansion needs new features. And I actually think in a weird way, if ArenaNet just cut them with End of Dragons, well, the End of Dragons is really weird because we've obviously had a lot of sacrifices to get to this point with the Icebreed Saga and so on. But after End of Dragons, if they just, like, cut them, there's, like, a confidence there, you know? It's like, if someone says, well, where are all the features? The thing is, people aren't even saying, where are the features with End of Dragons? They're saying, oh, fishing. Is that it? That's what they're saying. They're looking at fishing and they're saying, oh, it's not good enough. But if fishing wasn't there at all, if nothing was there, if it was just, hey, new campaign, new place to go, you might instinctively think, oh, that sounds like a shit expansion. But on the other hand, I think it would force you to immediately realize, okay, do you like the game? Do you like the core experience of the game? Do you want content? That's what this expansion is content. It's not transforming the game, it's just a bunch of new stuff to do. And there's like a confidence from that, I think. And it forces, people won't misjudge it. They don't have fishing as like a scapegoat or like something to distract them. It's just, oh wow, yeah, a Guild Wars expansion can just be content. And I somewhat do believe in that to a degree. That said, I do think there's a lot of other fundamental stuff the game needs, and mostly it's returning to previous systems, just as you've suggested here. So that is what I'd like the devs to do. It gets tricky there as well, though, because it's like, okay, if the expansion is, as a feature, improving dailies, well, what, is that a paid feature? Well, it's not, is it? So is that really expansion press? I mean, Paradox runs into this too, where they'll fix up a ton of core stuff while releasing new content. But they're not selling you everything that they're releasing in tandem with it. And they kind of managed to sidestep the problem, so maybe this isn't an issue at all. But yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying. I think that people will have to start asking themselves, do I find Guild Wars fun? For most of us, it's a really complicated thing to answer, because I think most of us do find it fun. It's just we run out of content really quickly, because access to content is very high in Guild Wars 2, and we've spent the last several years wondering, what do I do next? And fishing doesn't sound like an answer. That Canadian says, this is possibly a repeat question, or too much overlap with the previous, but assuming there is a 4th expansion, what area of the world do you think we'll go to next? Do you think Utopia is on the table, or possibly the supercontinent? Not just what you'd prefer, but what you think's most likely. Obviously just a guess at this point. Okay, most likely I think they'll do a Mist story, which I actually don't like the idea of too much, but with the Mist Stranger and stuff, and the idea of like some of the world versus world lore, I think they might do that. And Zoteka, I think Zoteka's a high chance, since it appeared in the art book. Where I would like as well, though, I'd like to see the Battle Isles. And you remember the Dermot Priory map had like trade routes going from the Battle Isles to some other continental regions? There are some areas of Tyria which are like 2 island masses next to each other. It's kind of the Starter Island mainland thing that Ilona did and that Cantha did. And you can see them positioned in some other places. I'd quite like to go there. I think one of them was called the Sunset Isles. And one of them was called like the Arid Island or whatever. I like the idea there. And there are actual trade lanes there, which suggests there are cities. And, you know, whether they've actually written lore or not, I think maybe we could play with that. And I like the idea beyond that as well of having one of the ancient races maybe still alive there. Maybe there are still seers around and we just didn't realize it's that they're on this other island, as well as a bunch of other races. And basically, yeah, this is an overlap answer to something I said before, so I'll mostly gloss over it. But that's my thoughts there on what I think's most likely. 2 more questions here. We've got David, who says, I just recently watched your Patreon world building video. Hey, thank you very much. Have you done any more of that recently? Is there anything you can show us? Well, no, not those videos. That video is very old. For people that don't know, I do offer some exclusive video content here on Patreon through the Google Drive, which I'm going to be rehosting. I'm not quite sure how to do that right now. One of them was, years ago, I was really into world building, and I basically did a video that taught people how they can invent a fantasy world without any imagination. And what do I mean by that? Like, if I just imagine this, whoever's listening to my voice right now. Hey, I want you to make a world. You might stumble immediately about, okay, where do I start? What do I do? And if you're not feeling creative or imaginative, I kind of just sort of give you guys some basic principles about geology, about science, about planets. And through those, and basically just drawing random lines on a sheet of paper or as digital art, you can create tectonic plates that move in realistic ways. And as soon as you do that with just a couple of lines that you can almost at random put on some paper, you can have your islands form themselves. And you can have your biomes form themselves. And anyway, I did a video sort of showing the start of this process years ago. And you can keep following the science. Science can be your guide. You don't need imagination. You can just sort of see where the world ends up. And, you know, there's a little bit of creativity as you go along, and you can add or remove as much as you like. And that was very fun. I actually am, again, doing another world building project at the moment, but it's far less... On this one, I'm full of creativity and imagination, and I'm not really going for... I mean, I was never that interested in scientific accuracy, to be honest. I just used it as a mechanism to create. My current world that I'm doing, it's this MMO project that I talked about. I have basically everything figured out of how the world works, and it's very fantastical. And it's one of these projects where you don't even get like the whole globe, you just get like a region of the world, and there's a few land masses there, but you don't get to see everything else, and everything else doesn't matter. And you know, I'm not really following the science of it, and it's more about the experiences within it. So yes, I am doing stuff. I don't really have any plans for videos with it until I can learn how to draw my own art and make my own maps again and stuff, which I'm very, very, very bad at the moment. And that reminds me, I've got to start looking at that Photoshop license. So yeah, thanks for the question. I'm glad you watched that video. It's really cool to hear people going back to old stuff, as is true on YouTube as well. Again, guys, I do see all the activity on those old videos when it comes up. And finally, we have Ailes. Ailes, last of all, who says, who posted this, I think when I started shooting this video, it was like 12 hours ago. It now says 24 hours ago. I'm confused because I'm not sure, is this thread still active? The Super Q&A was never made, or have I lost it? No, I'm making it now. In any case, since we didn't get a new PC video or stream, I was curious if you could give some feedback on how has your experience been with the PC build community, the build that the community supported. Is the performance on par with what you expected? Have you been particularly impressed with some piece of hardware in particular? How's your experience with the new Nvidia card? Did you play any games using ray tracing, DLSS tech that managed to particularly impress you? Well, as to those last two, not necessarily. So far, I'm very happy with the build. Just some stories about it. First of all, some of the RAM that I had with it was broken, and I was having the exact same kind of crash on the new PC as the old one. So I had to identify 240 sticks that I was sent. I took them out. So I have half the RAM that we actually paid for, but since then it's been rock solid stable, and that was like the big thing. So I'm perfectly happy with that, and I don't think I've really seen any problems. The biggest value I've had out of it was playing Guild Wars 2 in stereoscopic 3D. That was absolutely fantastic, and if you guys go to eBay and pick up some Nvidia 3D vision glasses, you try that out, you turn on that setting, it is a crazy experience, and I really do want to do a formal review at some point. But really, I mean, it's a shame, to be honest. So far, I would say the biggest gains that I've seen from this PC are actually whenever I play VR stuff. Like when I was playing Half-Life Alyx a little bit, especially Phasmophobia. Things run a lot smoother, there's a lot higher clarity. I can play better songs on Beat Saber, but really, that's not really like YouTube related, so I kind of regret that, to be honest. The games I've been playing, the MMOs, they don't really utilize it very well. Final Fantasy's super well optimized, so it doesn't really matter. And Guild Wars is really poorly optimized, so it doesn't really matter. I mean, I definitely did get some frames from Guild Wars, and, you know, we had a whole discussion. Should we go Intel or should we go AMD? People helped out on the Discord a lot with that. And, you know, I have no regrets whatsoever. I guess when I was playing Arc Genesis 2, I noticed Arc was running a lot better. But as far as video rendering and stuff, it's generally all the same. I'm quite excited to learn Premiere, because with Premiere, it might actually be able to utilize the card a bit better and do a little bit more. The other regret I have with the build, by the way, the only regret, as far as a review is concerned, is I went for hard drives, high-capacity hard drives for all my recording footage and stuff. Because I'm sort of from an era where SSDs you didn't want to write to, and you didn't want to read from too much, because it would, you know, it would ruin them a lot quicker. And when you're recording massive, streaming hundreds of gigs into these drives, that seems like a bad idea. Also, the idea of a high capacity SSD, I thought would be really expensive. But I guess prices have shifted a lot the past, like, what, 5, 6, 7 years since I built my other PC. And that's like more of a thing now, and I kind of wish I did SSDs instead of hard drives, because the time it takes for the hard drives to speed up, the noise, all that kind of stuff, I think it makes a lot of my production a lot clunkier. You know, like I'll load up a Windows directory, and I have to wait for ages for all of my ShareX screenshots to appear, all my thumbnails to appear, all my downloaded media or snapshots to appear. It's annoying. And I just know if I had a high-capacity SSD there instead, that wouldn't be happening. So I regret that a little bit. But overall, yeah, I mean, I've mentioned it several times. I'm happy with the build. I definitely don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth. I mean, it blows my mind, the support and the help that came early this year when I started talking about these PC problems. The most important thing was to get rid of those crashes. Those crashes were a nightmare. I mean, recording FF12 episodes was hell with those. And I'm future-proof too. That's a huge victory for me. You know, I don't have to do anything with hardware for years and years and years now, and it's crash-proof and it's fine, and I'm very, very happy with that. So, yeah, plenty of headroom, and I'm sorry I never did a specific video on it, but, you know, I don't do much with cameras. And what would I really do? Just film the side of a black box and say, here's the PC? I don't know, that somehow didn't click with me. The other big motivator was obviously this was a PC to show End of Dragons as well as possible. And I have seen performance improvements in Guild Wars 2, but now there's the DirectX 12 beta that they're still ironing out. The release date for the expansion got pushed back. So we kind of don't see the fruits of the whole thing. Until EOD's out itself, right? I'm still kind of in the market for some badass reshade stuff, by the way. I did see there was a cool kind of post-processing project as well that was shared with the internet a few weeks ago. I might install that and have a look at that soon. But hopefully that's a fun answer for you. And there you have it, guys. That's the Super Q&A for today. I'll tell you what, my throat is actually sore. I don't know how this ended up 2 hours, 15 minutes. I just kind of kept talking and talking. I had a break in the middle, and then I just kept talking and talking. I don't know why I have so much energy here, but they have it. Is anybody? Yeah, I don't know who's still listening after 2. I wonder what the retention stats on this video is going to be like. 2 hours, 15 minutes. If you're still listening, you're a trooper. I'm glad I got to keep you company at work or whatever you're doing. Maybe you're grinding in an MMO or something. Thanks very much for listening, guys. Seriously, I very much appreciate it. And if you want to be a part of the next Super Q&A, or if you just literally want to help me live my life, Patreon is the reason I can make videos. There's literally no other way to say it. If you want to be a part of that, please feel free to check out the website. I've always got a link down to it in the description below if you feel I've actually been putting out regular content and you know, it's worth a little bit of your time. So thank you very much, guys. Much appreciated. I'm going to go drink some water or something, and I'll see you on the next one very soon. And I hope you enjoyed the Jade Sea footage in the background. We'll talk about the trailer, the official stream in a couple of days, and I think I want to do another tier list on Living World stuff. Maybe rating Living World Season 1. You guys like the sound of that? See you soon.